Hey there, fellow night owls and curious minds. Another episode of Dreamland Encounters is about to unfold, where strange stories from the edges of our world help you unwind and slip into peaceful slumber. As always, I'm here to share real-life tales of encounters that stretch beyond our ordinary understanding. Before we get started, I'm eager to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're joining me from tonight. Maybe you're tucked in bed, sitting in a cozy chair, or winding down after a long day. Wherever you are, get comfortable and settle in. My grandfather, Walt, lived on a dry patch of land about 15 miles outside Tonopah, Nevada. His trailer sat backed up against a few acres of sagebrush and dust off a two-lane highway. I spent 2 summers out there with him when I was a kid, and later a couple weeks after college, mostly helping him fix up a busted well pump and paint the deck. He wasn't much for stories, but one night while walking past the old chicken coop, he shared something quietly. About once a month, maybe more, lights would come over the ridge. Not planes. They made no sound and would stop, sitting there like they were looking. He said this without fanfare, as if it were something he'd long accepted. I laughed a bit, thinking he meant flares or drones, but he just shook his head and said, "You'll see if you stay long enough." That summer, I was 24. Early August brought heat so intense you couldn't touch the metal porch railing during the day. Nights were different, still and quiet. Coyotes yipped in the distant hills, and an occasional car would roar by on 95, but mostly it was just crickets and wind. I'd stay up late, reading or organizing his tool shed, sorting through things he'd never use again. A week into my stay, on a Tuesday night, I went out after dinner to sit in a cheap plastic lawn chair by the fire pit. No fire was burning. I just wanted to cool off. The sky was crystal clear, stars spread like salt across black velvet. That's when I saw something. At first I thought it was a plane far past the northwest hills, but it didn't blink. It didn't move like a plane. It just hovered, a small, soft yellow light, about the size of a pencil eraser at arm's length. I watched for a full minute before calling for Walt. He didn't come out, likely already asleep. So I grabbed the binoculars kept by the back door. Even zoomed in, it didn't look like anything solid, just a light. I first noticed the lights one night while sitting by the fire pit. They appeared slowly, with a steady pulsing glow. The first one came into view, and about 5 minutes later, a second light showed up about half a mile to the left. They were identical in brightness and size. A third light joined them, hanging motionless in the sky. I watched them for what seemed like half an hour. They didn't move or shift, just remained perfectly still. No sound came from them. Not even the typical static buzz you might hear from high-altitude aircraft. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, all 3 lights vanished within a single second. No dimming, no movement, just gone. When I told Walt about it the next morning, he nodded like it was nothing new. He said they'd been doing this for years and warned me that if I watched long enough, they'd start moving. I didn't ask what he meant by that. A few nights later, I went out again. This time I brought a notebook and a cheap field recorder from school. I sat in the same spot and waited. At first, nothing happened, just stars and desert wind. Around midnight, the lights returned, 4 of them this time, spaced wider apart. One hung lower, almost touching the ridge. They were brighter now, casting a faint yellow glow on the hilltops. It was hard to judge their height or distance in such a flat landscape. I turned on the recorder and whispered the time, 12:07 a.m. For about 10 minutes, they hovered with the same pulsing glow, completely silent. Then something changed. The highest light started moving sideways, smooth and slow, then stopped. Another dipped lower, hanging just above the ridgeline. Suddenly, they all began to drift eastward. Their movement wasn't linear, but more like a circle around something invisible. A strange pressure filled my chest. Not fear, but something like being underwater. When they faded, it was different from before. They didn't blink out, but gradually dimmed until I couldn't tell if they were still there, or if my eyes were deceiving me. I stayed outside for another half hour listening. Nothing unusual, just wind through dry grass and maybe an owl in the distance. The next day, I played back the recording. My voice announced the time, followed by 30 minutes of desert silence. 2 years after my experience, Walt passed away. I attended his funeral and stayed in a motel in town. His trailer remained empty, eventually sold to someone who might have planned a solar array. I haven't returned since, but sometimes I check satellite maps of the area. The hills, road, and ridge line are unchanged, though the photos reveal nothing but empty desert. I was living alone then, about 6 miles outside Amorosa Valley, just off Valley View Road, essentially the middle of nowhere. Dennis, a retired guy, was my nearest neighbor, living about a quarter-mile down the dirt track. It was the kind of place where you kept windows shut during windy days to prevent dust from infiltrating everything. Despite the isolation, it was quiet, sometimes too quiet. My home was a basic single-wide trailer perched on cinder blocks. Nothing special. I'd moved there after my divorce, drawn by the low cost and the ability to bring my dog Maisie. Walt didn't want to discuss what happened. When I mentioned it once, he cryptically warned, "Don't look too long. Some things don't like being seen." I dropped the subject. On my last night there, around 2:30 a.m., I woke to a faint, slow-pulsing light through the window, like distant, thunderless lightning. Barefoot, I stepped onto the porch. The sky was clear, studded with stars. The lights had returned, closer this time. 5 of them hovered low behind the shed, beyond the chicken wire fence, near enough that I could see their glow reflecting off Walt's rusted tools. Motionless, they hung in the air. After watching for 2 minutes, one tilted, not sideways, but as if facing something. The others followed independently, moving with an almost organic, responsive quality. Then came a sound I can't quite describe. A deep, single thump, like something heavy landing far away, yet without any accompanying vibration. Moments later, the lights drifted upward slowly, dimming one by one until they vanished into the sky. That was the last time I saw them. Maisie's usually a tough dog, a mute, mostly shepherd with some lab mixed in, and typically fearless. She's chased off coyotes more than once. So when I found her trembling in the closet one September night, it caught me completely off guard. The evening had cooled quickly after a hot day. I'd just put away the fan that morning and was half watching some forgettable TV show when I heard it, a low thump against the trailer's back wall, more of a vibration than a sound. I muted the TV, listened, and heard nothing more. Probably the fridge or a rabbit under the porch, I thought. When I realized Maisie wasn't at my feet, which wasn't like her, I started looking. Kitchen, bathroom, and then the bedroom. There she was, wedged deep in the closet, tail tucked, panting hard. Her ears were flat, and she kept glancing upward, tracking something invisible. Treats and her leash didn't tempt her. She just whined and pushed deeper into the corner. The room felt strange, warmer than the rest of the house, with a faint metallic smell like a wet penny. Around 9:45 p.m., I stepped onto the porch to investigate. The night was perfectly still. Suddenly, a heavy, dry pressure enveloped me. Goosebumps erupted on my arms, neck hairs standing straight up. Then came a deep, steady hum, not from any specific direction, but everywhere. I could feel it in my chest, like standing next to an enormous speaker. Looking up, the stars were clear, but something was off. A football field-sized patch of sky looked blurred, shimmering like heat waves, except it was a cool night. The patch hung motionless while the hum grew slightly louder. I stood frozen, barely breathing, watching. Time seemed to stretch. 30 seconds? Maybe longer. Something was definitely not right. The humming vanished as abruptly as it began, cutting off like someone flipped a switch. The shimmer overhead flickered briefly, like a faulty projection, then disappeared completely. Maisie erupted into frantic barking from the closet. I returned inside to find her standing, alert and staring toward the door. She emerged and pressed against my legs, seeking comfort. Despite my attempts to soothe her, she kept glancing nervously at the windows. Sleep eluded both of us that night. Maisie paced the hallway until dawn approached. For the first time ever, I left the bedroom light on. Each time I nearly drifted off, that distant humming seemed to whisper at the edge of my hearing. But when I sat up, silence reigned. The next day, I drove into town for groceries and a change of scenery. At the gas station, I ran into Dennis and casually asked about any unusual sounds the previous night. He gave me a cryptic look, muttered something about this time of year, and walked away. A few days later, I discovered my porch thermometer was broken. The needle was stuck past the high end, as if it had spun wildly. No amount of tapping could reset it, so I replaced it. Maisie gradually returned to normal, though still cautious after dark. When I next took her outside at night, she refused to leave the porch. She stood rigid, nose raised, tail stiff, waiting. I didn't push her. Nothing more happened, but occasionally when I'm out late, the air grows unnaturally still, too quiet, as if the insects and night creatures are holding their breath, anticipating something passing overhead. I'd held an amateur radio license for about 2 years. No engineering genius, just a tire shop worker in Nebraska with a passion for shortwave frequencies. My setup was simple: a YAO FT991A and SDR dongle connected to an old HP laptop with a vertical antenna mounted on the roof. It was my go-to distraction during sleepless nights. Late winter nights were strange, with the weather wavering between snow and rain. While scanning around 29 megahertz for West Coast skip, I caught something unusual. A pulsing sound near 29.574 emerged. Not voice, not Morse, but 5 uniform tones spaced about 8 or 9 seconds apart. The pattern repeated for nearly 6 minutes. Initially, I thought it might be telemetry or a stuck repeater, but nothing matched my previous experience. I logged the signal, saved the SDR capture, and continued monitoring. The next night, around 2:30 a.m., the same signal returned exactly as before. On the third night, subtle changes appeared. The 5 pulses remained, but their spacing tightened to roughly 7 seconds. The final pulse in each group seemed to stretch slightly, almost imperceptibly. An unsettling sensation crept over me, that inexplicable feeling of being watched despite being alone. I kept glancing out the garage windows, seeing only frozen grass and hearing wind through the eaves. I created a new laptop folder labeled 29574 odd, carefully copying and backing up all 3 recordings to a USB stick. Seeking answers, I posted the spectrogram and audio clip to a ham radio forum. Within an hour, a user from Oregon responded, claiming he'd heard similar tones on 29.577 the previous night, though only for 2 minutes. When I requested a recording, he promised to check but never replied. The 4th night brought unexpected developments. After waiting until 3:45 a.m. with no activity, I went inside. Surprisingly, at 4:07 a.m., the rig inexplicably powered on by itself. Despite having shut down the software and interface, the logs confirmed its activation. It tuned precisely to 29.5748 and began recording. This time, the 14-minute signal had transformed. The 5 tones lost the ear-sharp definition, becoming more organic. They pulsed closer together, almost overlapping, reminiscent of breathing. When I checked the laptop the next morning, the SDR program remained open, adding to the mystery. The session log showed a timestamp, capture start 0473. I'd made a folder called 29574 odd, but when I returned to the garage after work that night, it had vanished. Completely gone. I checked everywhere, the main drive, backup stick, recycle bin, nothing. The system restore point showed no record of deletion, and recovery software only pulled up old Excel docs from months ago, not a single wave or FLAC file from the last week. I unplugged the laptop and left it on the floor. The next night, I used an old Tascam handheld recorder from college. Set it to record directly from the speaker, running the radio on battery to avoid any laptop connection. At 2:38 a.m., the signal came through. I was in the garage with the door open to the backyard, wrapped in a blanket. Northwest wind was light, the sky clear with Orion overhead. The Tascam recorded 10 minutes before stopping abruptly. Battery was fine, but the display said wreck, and the saved file was 0 bytes, not corrupted, just empty. Then I heard the tone outside. Not from the speaker, but from the air itself. Faint, with a pulsing rhythm of 5 soft notes coming from the soybean fields behind my fence. Standing in the grass, I held my breath. This wasn't wind or crickets. Frost covered the shed and grass under my slippers. I walked 10 steps into the yard, and the pulsing faded. When I waited, it returned closer. I went back inside. Morning brought another oddity. My radio was detuned. The dial showed 29.5740, but the waterfall was empty static. I reset the device, reconnected the SDR, and scanned the entire 10-meter band. Nothing. My forum post had disappeared along with the Oregon guy's reply. His username? No account existed. That night I turned everything off. Windows shut, curtains closed, I stayed in bed. At 2:30 the tone started again, not from a speaker but through the walls. 5 soft pulses, a short pause, then 5 more. The road trip from Phoenix to Reno was mostly just for fun. My girlfriend Megan booked our stopover in Rachel, Nevada, a place I'd never heard of before. The extraterrestrial highway sign seemed gimmicky, but I figured it would just be another boring desert stretch. We planned to hit some ghost towns, hike around Zion, and maybe try our luck at the casino for a night. We arrived at the Moonlight Motor Inn around 6:30, just before sunset. The motel was a row of 6 rooms shaped like 70s trailers, parked facing a cracked lot with miles of open desert. A dusty diner sat across the road, looking unchanged since 1982. The front desk guy, an older man with a white beard and a patch that read Randy, handed us a blue plastic key tag. When I mentioned we were heading to Reno, he nodded like I'd said we were driving to the moon. "You kids staying just the one night? That's smart," he said, then hesitated and looked out the window. "Don't go wandering after dark," he added. I laughed, thinking he meant coyotes or snakes. Megan didn't even hear him. She was already walking to the room. Inside was surprisingly clean, stained carpet but fresh sheets, a little table by the window, a bulky old TV, and a humming mini fridge made up the sparse furnishings. We dropped our backpacks and walked to the diner as the sky turned that bright orange unique to deserts. Dinner was basic: burgers, fries, and watery coffee. 2 truckers played cards in the back, while Patsy Cline looped on the jukebox. Later that night, a strange sound emerged. It seemed to be inside the pipes or ductwork. I checked everything mechanical: thermostat, water heater, fridge, but found nothing. Standing in the kitchen, I felt uneasy. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt like it was waiting. It stopped around 3 a.m. The next morning, I took down the antenna and packed everything into a tote in the garage. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard the signal since, but every night around 2:30, my laptop mysteriously wakes up. The screen stays black, the fan runs for a minute, then it powers down. We cracked a couple beers and sat on the curb outside our motel room around 8:15. The night had cooled down fast, but it was still warm with a breeze picking up and stars beginning to emerge. The sky was absurdly clear, the kind of clarity that makes you stop and stare. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness like someone had carelessly scattered salt on black velvet. We weren't talking, just watching. Megan pointed out constellations. She knows that stuff better than I do, and I managed to spot a few satellites drifting overhead. The silence was almost complete, broken only by occasional gusts of wind. Around 9, maybe a bit later, Megan asked about a light low in the southern sky. At first, I thought it was a plane, a steady white light with no blinking, but it wasn't moving. Not really. I suggested it might be something from the nearby base, since we weren't far from Groom Lake. Still, something felt off. It just hung there, perfectly motionless. Megan wondered if it was a star, but it wasn't in the right spot and didn't twinkle. Then it started to rise, straight up, smooth and controlled. Too fast for a balloon or drone, maybe a few hundred feet, maybe more. It was hard to judge without any reference points. We both stood up. I remember Megan saying, "That's not right." Then something impossible happened. In an instant, the single white dot split into 2 lights, sitting side by side, about a thumb's width apart if you held your hand to the sky. No flash, no gradual movement, just a sudden separation. The lights hovered for maybe 10 seconds. Then they vanished. Not faded, not flew away, just gone, like someone had flipped a switch. No sound, no trail, no afterglow. 1 second there, the next, nothing. I looked at Megan. She was staring, unblinking, at the empty sky. "Did you see that?" I asked, but we both knew what we'd witnessed made no sense. I'd been working at Dugway for 4 years as a facility tech. Nothing fancy, just part of the civilian support crew handling infrastructure like HVAC, electrical routing, pressure systems, and backup power. The base is massive and mostly silent. We were staying at a small motel after a long day. Around 9:30, we went inside and I locked the door, something I never usually do. The TV only showed static, then turned blue with no signal. Our phones had 0 bars, which was strange since I'd gotten texts from my brother earlier at the diner. Around 1 a.m., Megan woke me up. She was standing by the window and whispered that something was outside. I looked out and saw nothing at first, just dark desert and faint hill outlines. The security light flickered overhead. Then I spotted it, a soft glow on the ground about 100 yards away in the scrub. It wasn't like a normal flashlight. The light was perfectly round, maybe softball-sized, and didn't spread out. Megan noticed it was moving, drifting silently just above the ground, sliding left to right in a straight line before stopping and hovering. I shut the curtain. We didn't sleep, just sat in the blue TV light. Eventually the signal returned and a news anchor's voice filled the room, but I wasn't really listening. By morning, everything seemed normal. The sky was pale blue. The same truckers were still playing cards at the diner like time had stood still. We checked out around 8. Randy was gone, replaced by a woman in her 40s who smiled politely as if we'd never met. As we pulled out, I looked back. Nothing unusual in the sky or hills, but something had changed. The TV sign all stayed strong for the rest of our trip, and the stars never looked quite the same again. I worked in a facility with long, empty hallways where people rarely interacted. My shift was mostly in Sector 3, an older underground area with concrete corridors and reinforced doors. No windows. Officially, it was a backup command center for potential infrastructure failure, though I rarely saw anyone using the communications room. Something peculiar happened every night around 200 hours. A low, deep thump would resonate through the space. Not loud enough to shake anything, but definitely felt more than heard. I started calling it the pulse. The first time I noticed it, I was alone in a silent hallway, checking coolant lines for an old generator panel. Crouched with a flashlight in my mouth, I suddenly felt a single, slow thud, like someone had dropped a 100-pound weight a couple of floors down. Deliberate, heavy. I stood up and waited. Nothing followed. Initially, I thought it might be seismic activity related to the base's desert location, but it happened again the next night, and the next. Over 2 weeks, I made sure to be in the same hallway during that time window. The pulse occurred every single night, sometimes faint, sometimes stronger. Once it even came twice, about 10 seconds apart. This didn't feel like typical machinery. I knew the difference between pump cycles, generator hums, and compressor clicks. This felt organic, like a breath, like a heartbeat. Cautiously, I asked around. Don Merritt, the guy I was replacing, had worked there 6 years before transferring to Sandia. I emailed him, asking off the record about anything strange in Sector 3 at night. His response was cryptic. Stay out of the lower corridor behind Panel 17. That was it. No explanation. No follow-up. And yet there was indeed a narrow hallway behind Panel 17 that I'd passed dozens of times, but never explored. It wasn't on my usual route. I brought a thermal sensor with me that night. Nothing fancy, just a handheld device. The hallway behind the junction box wasn't lit, and I wanted to see if whatever was generating that strange energy might have a heat signature. Standing at the mouth of Panel 17 corridor, I powered on the sensor. The temperature was unusual, normally around 66 to 68 degrees, but now it was 60 and dropping with no moving air. Right on schedule, the pulse hit. The sensor didn't spike traditionally. Instead, it rippled as if something massive shifted beneath the floor. I watched the temperature change in a ring pattern, the center going cold, 56, 54, 52, then warming again. It felt like a wave passing through the concrete. At the sensor's edge, about 20 feet down the corridor, I caught a fleeting movement. Not a shape or form, just a subtle dip in the cold pattern, like something had briefly blocked the ambient chill. I stood motionless, barely breathing. After a minute, I backed away and returned to the main corridor. Who would believe me? Those who needed to know already did. A week later, I was replacing a pressure regulator for the same junction box. The job should have taken 30 minutes, but something was different. As I tightened the lower coupling, I felt the pulse again. My watch read L143, too early. This time, it wasn't isolated. The floor pulsed again at 146, then at 150. A low metallic ringing filled my ears like old CRT feedback. The air felt dense and heavy, dry but humid. My breathing seemed muffled, as if the pressure had shifted. Then I heard them, soft, slow footsteps, possibly barefoot, echoing faintly down the dark hallway behind Panel 17. I raised my flashlight, turning toward the sound. Nothing. The footsteps stopped. I waited 10 minutes, but nothing moved. The air pressure eased and the ringing in my ears subsided. I finished the job and left, starting to sleep in my truck during overnight Shia feasts. No one noticed. We barely had supervisors on the night crew, and I still logged all my work. During my last month at Dugway, a new guy named Bryce joined my shift. He seemed young and sharp, probably ex-Air Force. On his second week, he asked about an underground lab. When I asked why, he mentioned feeling something in the walls every night around 2, a low hum. I didn't respond. The day I left, I followed protocol, leaving my badge and key card on the desk. My personal locker was clean, with nothing missing. But behind the locker, the concrete and aluminum paneling caught my eye. Faint marks were visible, not scratches or writing, but circular indentations about 5 inches wide. They looked like something inside the wall had been slowly pushing outward. No one ever mentioned these marks. After Dugway, I moved to Montana and took a job in civil works. The underground shifts and strange pulses were behind me. Yet sometimes, in the early morning as the sun rises, I can still feel something breathing deep beneath the ground. Back in 2006, I was stationed at a small radar facility outside Minot, North Dakota. This wasn't the main Air Force base, but a satellite installation. Just 3 concrete buildings, a perimeter fence, and radio towers pointing in every direction. Most nights were dead quiet, with snow covering the landscape for half the year and wind dominating the rest. At 27, I was an ex-Navy contract communications technician. The job meant sitting in a chair for 12-hour shifts, monitoring systems and checking logs. 4 of us rotated through the facility, with 2 inside the ops trailer and 2 in the maintenance building. Nights typically meant just me and Cole Varga, an older guy with an Army background who kept to himself. It was late January, around 2 a.m., with a blizzard warning in effect and visibility near 0. I was logging routine static bursts when Cole returned from a smoke break, looking strange. He brushed snow off his jacket and asked, "You feel that?" Confused, I said nothing. He glanced at the wall clock and muttered, "Never mind. It happens sometimes, usually Wednesdays." I figured he was just killing time, saying something weird to break the monotony. Every Wednesday at 2:13 a.m., something strange happened at our site. Cole first told me about it casually, mentioning how the sky went completely quiet. Not dark, not empty, but quiet, as if someone had flipped a switch and turned off everything above us. It started after they swapped out some equipment in late 2004. A new tower, a new dish, no real explanation. When I asked what he meant by quiet, he just said, "You'll know it when it happens." The first time I experienced it was on a brutally cold night. I was checking the tower lights, my breath freezing inside my nose. As I turned back toward the door, everything stopped. The wind vanished, the stars disappeared. It wasn't an overcast sky. It was like someone had placed a solid lid over the universe. Total silence surrounded me. No tower hums, no snowgrass rustling, not even the power lines buzzed. It felt like being deep underwater with a crushing stillness. 5 or 6 seconds passed, then everything snapped back. Wind rushed, antennas moved, a few stars returned. Inside, Cole just looked up from his coffee and asked, "See what I mean?" When I suggested it might be cloud cover, he laughed. "Clouds don't kill EM bleed like that," he said. After that, I started watching. Every Wednesday around 2:10, I'd go outside. Sometimes the exterior lights would dim briefly. Once I saw a long, flat shape blocking the stars above the far tower. Silent, motionless, then gone. By March, things got weirder. The seismic sensors behind the generator shed registered massive pressure spikes, like something enormous passed overhead. No visuals, just that same dead silence before everything returned to normal. Cole logged it, but didn't flag the incident. When I asked why, he just shrugged. "Command doesn't want it flagged," he said. In April, we had a scheduled systems check during that window. Base wanted a full diagnostic of the dish relays, and things were about to get interesting. We were in the ops trailer watching the signal returns. At exactly 2:13, all outbound frequencies spiked into the red for about 4 seconds. Incoming signals dropped to 0, just a flat line across every band. The screens blinked twice and reset like nothing had happened. Cole leaned back, arms crossed. "That's new," he said. Later that same night, the backup clocks jumped forward by 3 minutes. The main clock stayed the same. GPS sync showed no error, but I watched the digital readouts change. Not slowly, not a glitch, just straight from 214 to 217. We manually recalibrated them. Cole logged it, but again, no flags were raised. The weirdest part came in late May. Snow was melting off in patches, and I'd gotten into the habit of bringing a camera during early morning checks. Just a basic DSLR with night mode. I set it on a tripod near the eastern fence, pointing straight up, and triggered a 10-second exposure at exactly 2:12 or 50 a.m. After the silence passed, I went back to check the shot. It looked normal at first. Then I zoomed in. There was something faint near the center. Not a dot, not a streak, more like a smudge. A shadow burned into the image, long and wide and slightly curved. No lights, no definition, but definitely there. I tried another shot from the same angle. Nothing. The next night, I showed it to Cole. He stared at it for a long time and said, "You keep that off any network just in case." June was my last month there. I'd already put in my transfer papers. I didn't tell anyone outside the site about what I'd seen. Not because I thought it was classified, but because I didn't know how to explain it. You start trying to describe silence to someone who's never heard real silence, and they just nod along. On my last Wednesday shift, I went out early. I sat on the truck's hood with a thermos, watching the sky. At 2:13, everything stopped again. Not just sound, but movement, wind, insects, even the clouds drifting west just paused. I looked straight up, and I swear, for a second, I saw it. Not the shape, but the absence. A part of the sky that didn't match the rest, like a patch of different black, darker somehow. Then it moved, sliding west without making a sound, and the world came back online. I didn't say anything to Cole. I just went back inside and finished my shift. A week later, I was in Seattle working at a drone facility. I was up in the Cascades that night, just outside Winthrop. The air was dry, with hardly a cloud in the sky and no moon. I'd taken the week off from work and brought my old camera to a pull-off spot about 10 minutes up Forest Road 37, a location I knew well. There's a small clearing off to the right past the ditch, perfect for setting up a tripod without worrying about headlights. I arrived just after sunset, ate a sandwich in the driver's seat, and drank a bottle of water. Waiting for the sky to darken completely, I prepared my gear around 9:15, tripod, camera, cable release. No telescope, just a wide-angle lens for long exposures. My goal was simple: capture the big sky full of stars with the tree line along the bottom. By 10 p.m., I'd settled into a rhythm. 2-minute exposures, reviewing and adjusting the aperture. The temperature dropped quickly, probably into the low 50s. The air smelled sharp, pine, dry dirt, a hint of distant smoke. Totally silent, except for occasional bug sounds and tree creaks. Around 10:30, I set up for a longer 5-minute shot, hoping to create a star trail effect against the static trees. I clicked the shutter and leaned against my car's hood, zoning out. No wind, just occasional distant sounds like branches cracking. Normal stuff. When the timer went off, I checked the screen. The stars looked fine, nice arcs with good separation. But something else caught my eye. Across the upper left quadrant, a blurred looping shape. A light trail like a sideways lowercase cursive E. Too large and bright to be a bug, and unlike any aircraft path I'd seen. Zooming in, I saw a single continuous line. Almost white in the middle, fading to bluish at the edges. A perfectly smooth curve, as if drawn by a compass. I still have the photo. Kept it on a USB drive, never uploaded. The camera's long gone now. Sometimes around 2 in the morning I still wake up and step outside. I look up, I listen. I was out taking night photos, camera mounted on a tripod, scanning the sky. When I reviewed the images later, something strange caught my eye. A perfectly curved loop in the frame, bright and solid, with no tapering at the ends. It didn't look like a typical camera artifact. No sound had accompanied the shape, no mechanical buzz or drone hum. To move that fast and trace such a precise curve in just 5 minutes would require something incredibly swift and silent. I scanned the sky and treetops again. Everything was motionless. I double-checked the camera settings. No overexposure, no lens flare, just this mysterious loop. Opening the RAW file, I tried adjusting the contrast, but nothing changed. The shape remained distinct, solid and crisp, something that should have been visible to the naked eye. An odd sensation crept over me. Not exactly like being watched, but more like standing near a live electrical wire, something present yet invisible. I took additional exposures of the same spot, staring intently. No movement. No planes, birds, or flashes appeared. When I later viewed the images on my laptop's larger screen, the loop looked even more peculiar. Its curvature was unnaturally precise, almost mechanical. The brightness remained consistent throughout, with no motion blur or exposure changes. Strangely, it passed between stars instead of crossing them, as if deliberately avoiding contact. I showed the image to Neil, a friend who'd flown Cessnos. He initially suggested it was a plane or drone, then speculated about a satellite flare. But the tight spiral contradicted typical satellite movement. Satellites travel in straight lines, not intricate loops. Uncertain what to make of it, I eventually posted the photo to a photography forum. Comments ranged from lens defects to meteors to ball lightning. Most dismissed it as nothing unusual, but something about the image felt different, unexplained and intriguing. That night, I didn't sleep well, the mysterious loop lingering in my thoughts. I was driving my dad's old Suburban out toward Rachel, hoping to make the most of a 3-day weekend. My wife Lisa dozed in the passenger seat, our 10-year-old daughter Ellie played a game on my phone in the back, and my brother Dean from Austin scanned the radio, searching for a decent station. We weren't chasing aliens or anything. I just wanted to see the black mailbox and camp near the little alley and drawn to the quiet remoteness of the desert. We'd come up from Alamo around noon and hit the 375, the extraterrestrial highway. The road was empty, skies clear, temperature hovering around 84 degrees. I'd filled up at the Sinclair in Ash Springs, so we were set for gas. Right around mile marker 34, something strange happened with the radio. Dean was flipping through stations when weird voices started coming through. Quiet, distant, kind of overlapping. At first, I thought it might be a foreign talk show, but it didn't sound like any language I recognized. What was odd was that it wasn't just one station. Dean kept scanning, and the strange sounds persisted. They'd fade momentarily, then return. Same tone, same wretch. Yitham, almost like it was bleeding across every channel. Then, just after we passed mile 35, it cut out completely. Total silence, just static. Dean looked at me and said, "That was creepy." I didn't respond. Since that trip, I've gone back to a specific spot twice. Same setup, same gear, same time of night. Never captured anything similar again. I even brought a sound recorder once, leaving it running for an hour. It picked up owls, wind, maybe a coyote, but nothing unusual. There's one photo from that trip still on my desktop. I've tried enhancing it, adjusting levels, applying filters, but it just looks more artificial. The shape is embedded in the raw data, just like the stars, with the same pixel values. It's the only shot I didn't post anywhere. Sometimes I'll stare at it, trying to remember if I missed something obvious that night, but I didn't. There was nothing in the sky, at least nothing I could see. We rolled into Rachel around midday, the gravel lot behind the inn nearly empty, except for a few RVs and a couple from Utah with their telescope near the picnic tables. Ellie darted around the UFO statue while we grabbed burgers. I asked June, the woman behind the counter, about camping spots sheltered from the wind. She recommended an old cattle turnout a couple miles north with solid ground. By 4 p.m., we had our campsite set up behind a small rise, mountains spreading out to the west. The dust trail from the highway was visible, but not the road itself. Hot dogs sizzled on the camp stove as stars began to emerge. No cell service, but nobody seemed to mind. Lisa read her book, Ellie played with glow sticks, and Dean and I shared a couple of beers. Then, around 8:45, the radio crackled to life. The Suburban radio we hadn't touched since lunch suddenly whispered, keys not even in the ignition. Everything was powered down, but the speakers emitted a low, faint sound. Voices emerged, first a whisper, then rising for about 5 seconds before dropping back to silence. "Is someone talking?" Ellie asked. Dean investigated, opening the driver's door and turning the key to accessory. The display remained black, but audio continued. No station, just layered, unintelligible voices. We all leaned in, listening for maybe 10 seconds before it stopped as abruptly as it began. "Okay, that's weird," Dean said. I agreed, feeling more unsettled than scared. Something about the timing seemed deliberate, always happening near that stretch of highway. We slept soundly. Wind picked up after midnight, but the tents held firm. No strange lights, no unusual dreams. Morning came, and we packed up, drove back into Rachel for coffee, then headed home the same route we'd arrived on. At mile marker 34, it happened again. The engine noise dropped suddenly, those strange overlapping voices rising. The dashboard display blinked and reset to 12. A shimmer in the rearview mirror caught my eye, like heat waves, but the pavement was cool, the hood not radiating any warmth. Something was definitely off. We were driving on a highway when something strange happened. The radio was acting weird, and we could barely make out the sounds. I slowed down to 45 miles per hour, scanning the roadside carefully. Ellie complained that her ears hurt, and Lisa spotted something in the distance. About 100 yards into the desert, a dark, narrow object rose from the sand. At first I thought it was a fence post, but something was off. It cast no shadow, even though the sun was low and sharp behind it. Dean tried to take a photo, but his phone screen remained completely black. After a few attempts, he gave up. When we passed mile marker 35, the voices suddenly disappeared. Total silence fell over the car. The display returned moments later, and Lisa sat back without a word. Ellie started crying, so I pulled over and gave her a Gatorade. We sat on the show, elder for a while, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Back home, everything seemed normal. The radio worked fine, and Dean's phone rebooted by itself during dinner. No evidence remained from our desert encounter. No photos, no recordings, despite Dean's insistence that he tried. 2 weeks later, while in town getting water heater parts, Ellie asked if we were returning to the place with the whisper voices. I firmly said no, and she replied, "Good." Then she revealed something chilling. When we passed the marker last time, she had seen something walking behind the fence line in the scrub. Not a car, not a person, something else. She described it as moving with arms straight down and its head unnaturally low. When I asked why she hadn't mentioned it earlier, she said she didn't think we'd believe her, and she's not the type to make up stories. I never saw what she described, but I remember a strange shimmer in the mirror, like heat, but not heat, and the sound. It wasn't words, exactly, but it wasn't random noise either. It felt almost like instructions or warnings in a language I couldn't comprehend. What struck me most was how focused and deliberate it seemed, as if it knew exactly who we were and why we were there. I'd been through this routine countless times. A quick nap, nothing unusual, but this time felt different. When I opened my eyes, an eerie silence enveloped the truck. It wasn't just cool, it was cold, despite no AC running. My phone and cab lights were dead, though the screen showed 4:08 p.m. Something wasn't right. I'd never sleep more than 30 minutes, yet somehow, 1 hour and 27 minutes had vanished. My wristwatch confirmed the same time. Half awake, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd accidentally dismissed my alarm or forgotten to set it. But a nagging feeling persisted. A sharp, metallic smell hung in the air, like a brand new radiator. The lights refused to turn on, even though the battery indicator looked normal and the engine started without issue. I stepped out to stretch, noticing the sun lower in the sky than expected. The Montana landscape glowed in that distinctive orange-pink hue. Walking around the rig, everything appeared normal. Trailer doors locked, tires intact, no signs of tampering. Yet an unsettling sensation crept over me, that feeling of being watched. Anyone who spent time alone on remote roads knows this instinct. The tree line about 30 yards back from the gravel shoulder was dense with pines and scrub climbing toward a ridge. Sunlight filtered weakly through, casting long, flickering shadows, except there was no wind, no movement, no birds, no insects. An unnatural silence blanketed the July landscape. Then I saw it, something low, moving past a deadfall. At first I thought it was an animal, a raccoon or coyote, but its movement was wrong, unnaturally smooth. It disappeared behind a stump as quickly as it appeared, leaving me with a deep sense that something was fundamentally off. I was driving west on Highway 36 through Kansas, just past Belleville. The road stretched out before me, empty and quiet. As I scanned the landscape, something caught my eye near the shoulder. I leaned closer, trying to get a better look. That's when I noticed them. 3 small, pale figures low to the ground, maybe 2 feet tall. They were spaced apart, but moving in perfect unison, almost like they were coordinating around something hidden. I couldn't make out faces or specific details. just these pale shapes partially obscured by tree branches. Their movement was strange. Not walking, exactly, but gliding just above the forest floor. No footsteps, no sound. My brain desperately tried to categorize them. Deer, hikers, kids playing a prank. But nothing fit. Their motion was too smooth, too deliberate. All three turned simultaneously, clearly aware I was watching. I slowly backed Toa, RD my cab, eyes locked on the woods. The moment I reached for the door handle, my headlights switched on by themselves. High beams, with no one in the driver's seat, no one around. The sudden light flooded the trees, and just like that, the figures vanished. Only empty forest remained. I climbed in, locked the door, and gripped the steering wheel. I wasn't about to investigate. I kept the engine off, barely breathing. Despite not being easily frightened, something felt deeply wrong. After about 5 minutes, I started the engine. Everything seemed normal. Dashboard, GPS, air conditioning, all functioning. My phone suddenly buzzed, showing service had returned. No new notifications. I drove 2 straight hours before stopping again. Later that night, at a truck stop near I-15, I checked my dash cam. I always keep it recording, even when parked. But the footage from that stretch between mile markers 242 and 409? Just static. No video, no error message. The file existed but contained only white noise. Every other recording was perfectly fine. I considered reporting it but quickly dismissed the idea. What would I say? That I saw strange figures floating in the woods? It didn't sound credible. So I marked that stretch on my map and made a decision. I would never stop there again. No matter how tired I was, I'd drive extra miles or through the night. I still have the dashcam file. Sometimes I replay it, hoping to catch something I missed. A shape, a sound, anything. But it remains nothing more than static. Late July, 2 summers back, I was heading home to Colorado after a quick visit to my cousin in Missouri. My 8 a.m. hospital shift as a radiology tech was waiting, and an all-night drive didn't seem like a big deal. I left just after 9 p.m. The sky still held a soft pink glow in the west, with thick, warm air hanging around. One of those nights that feels languid and heavy. I had some snacks, a Red Bull, and music playing low. Once past the last gas station in Mono, the landscape turned into an endless stretch of 2-lane road and flat cornfields. About an hour into my drive, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A light, not headlights, hovering much higher. Initially I thought it might be a plane, but it wasn't blinking, just a steady white point with yellowish edges. I watched it, noticing it stayed perfectly centered in the mirror, regardless of the road's curves. Maybe it was Venus or another bright celestial object, I thought, but something felt off. 20 minutes passed, and the light remained unchanged. Same size, same position, not shrinking like a distant aircraft would. Curious, I tapped the brakes to see if the light would shift. It didn't. I even rolled down the window, leaning out to look directly behind me. Strangely, I couldn't spot it with my eyes. The light only appeared in the mirror. Each time I turned to look, it vanished. But the moment I glanced back, it reappeared, dead center. A slow, crawling sensation began to build in my gut, that primal feeling when something isn't right. I killed the music, listening intently. Just the hum of tires, a whisper of wind, and some rattling from the cooler in the back seat. The road remained completely empty. No taillights ahead, no headlights behind. I flipped the mirror up, unable to bear looking at it anymore. But I kept driving, passing a lone grain elevator with its blinking red light and a forlorn gas station that seemed to fade into the night's emptiness. The night stretched out before me, cornfields and darkness blending into one another somewhere past Norton. Around 11:30, I pulled into a small gravel rest area with a metal table under a pavilion. Stretching my legs and stepping out to relieve myself, I scanned the sky for that strange light. There it was again, faint and hovering just above the eastern horizon. Unmoving, unblinking. I tried to focus, but something felt off. My eyes kept drifting away, as if the light was somehow both compelling and mundane. It was difficult to maintain my gaze, almost like the light was deliberately resisting my attention. Continuing my drive, I periodically glanced at the side mirror. The light had returned, slightly brighter but still perfectly centered. The car seemed to constrict around me. Every tiny sound became amplified. Dashboard squeaks, tire crackles against the rough road. The air felt thick, heavy, as if we were climbing in altitude, though the landscape remained completely flat. I rolled down the windows and switched off the air conditioning. Something else struck me then. No bugs. Typically, driving through Kansas in summer meant a windshield constantly pelted by insects, but mine remained pristine. Not a single moth or beetle had splattered against the glass in nearly an hour. The rearview mirror revealed the light was growing larger, closer. I tapped the brakes, watching to see if it would shift, but it remained locked in place, almost like a projection rather than a real object in the sky. I started talking to myself, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it's a helicopter, I muttered, or a tower I missed. But these explanations rang hollow. Helicopters move. Towers don't track you across county lines. Outside Oberlin, I stopped at another rest area. Finding an old cigarette pack belonging to my ex, I sat on the curb and smoked, something I never do. I deliberately avoided looking skyward, unable to confront whatever was following me. The job wasn't glamorous. As Tom Ray's, I worked nights at a communications outpost near Glacier National Park, mostly handling routine maintenance and system checks. The site was isolated, about 6 miles off the main road, nestled in the tree line, surrounded by forest and snowpack. We had generators and backup systems. I'd been there 5 nights a week, mostly alone, for just over a year. Late October that year, nights were already freezing with a few early flurries, though the ground hadn't fully iced up. The evening started typically. I drove in just before sunset, around 5:45, unlocked the gate, let it close behind me, and parked next to the main cabin. The site was simple, a squat concrete building with a satellite rig, 2 generators, and a 40-foot steel antenna tower. No windows. Security was basic, padlocks, a motion light, and cameras feeding to the regional telecom office in Kalispell. Inside, it was sparse. A small kitchen, a cot, storage shelves, and server equipment with blinking lights and humming fans. Around 9 p.m., I stepped outside to grab a wrench set from my truck. A tower fan had started rattling, and I wanted to tighten its bolts. I set my black, briefcase-sized tool case on the gravel near the tower's base while checking the fixture. Later, driving home, something changed. I hunched down, eyes fixed on the road, deliberately avoiding the mirror. An unseen weight lingered behind me. For 2.5 hours it followed, never speeding up, never slowing down, just hovering in the same spot, seemingly waiting. By 4 a.m., I reached home. I parked in the driveway and sat for a long time. The sky looked normal. Birds chirped. A neighbor's sprinklers started. I never saw it again. But for those hours, something was there. I stepped out briefly after my phone buzzed with a message from my brother. Maybe 5 minutes, tops. But when I returned, something was off. My tool case lay open, and every single tool, from the tiniest Allen key to the full-length torque wrench, was arranged in a perfect spiral on the gravel. This wasn't a random spill. Each tool was positioned with surgical precision, same curve, same orientation, nothing touching. The case itself sat neatly beside the spiral, hinges facing south. I studied the scene, looking for any sign of disturbance. The gravel was undisturbed, no scatter marks anywhere. I scanned my surroundings. Forest to the east and north, a slope rising behind the tower, the road leading back to the gate. No lights, no tracks, just the sound of gravel crunching under my boots and guy wires creaking softly in the wind. "Okay, what the hell?" I muttered, breaking the eerie silence. I was the only one with a key to the gate and building. The outdoor cameras hadn't triggered, and there was no cell signal strong enough for a remote prank. Crouching down, I touched one of the wrenches. Strangely, it felt cold, colder than the others, and slightly damp, as if it had been sitting out far longer than 5 minutes. Checking my phone, I confirmed I'd been inside for 7 minutes. The log computer timestamps matched. My fan issue note at 9:12, brother's message reply at 9:19. Everything lined up, but something felt wrong. I considered calling my supervisor, but imagined how ridiculous that conversation would sound. Instead, I cleaned up the tools, returned them to the case, and brought it inside. For the rest of the night, I stayed put. Around midnight, the generator briefly stuttered. Not a full shutdown, just a momentary dip. When I checked the monitors, camera 3's feed facing the tower had vanished. Other cameras were fine. I rebooted the system, and the feed returned, But the footage between 9:15 and midnight was simply gone. No error message, no signal warning, just a blank black screen. I had a dash cam running the whole trip, one of those cheap ones from Walmart that records in 5-minute loops and saves everything to a 64-gigabyte card. I bought it mostly for insurance purposes and never had a reason to really look at the footage before. In late March, I drove past Groom Lake, not trying to see anything special. I'd flown into Vegas for a job interview and decided to take the long way home through Tonopah just to get off the interstate. I like weird places, not in the conspiracy kind of way, but for that quiet middle-of-nowhere vibe. The part that matters was late afternoon, maybe 5:30 p.m. The sun was low but not gone. I was heading south on 375, what they call the extraterrestrial highway. After stopping for gas and snacks at the tiny store in Rachel, I kept driving. Not much out there, just long stretches of open desert, low ridges, barbed wire, and the occasional faded warning sign. There was this one spot, maybe 20 minutes past the turnoff, where the road gets close to the perimeter. Not close enough to get in trouble, but close enough to see the white pickup truck sitting on the hilltops, just watching. I slowed down a little to look. You always hear about the camo dudes, and I figured why not? I had time. Nothing happened. I didn't stop or get out. Just rolled by slow, maybe 30 miles per hour. I remember glancing at the hills, thinking I saw a flash of light from a windshield or maybe binoculars. It was gone fast. I kept going. The next morning when I went out to check the camera, the lens was clean. No frost, no smudges, but the mount had been twisted a few degrees off its bracket. Not enough to change the view, but enough to notice, like someone had touched it and put it back. I drove straight to the Kalispell office after my shift ended. I didn't sleep. I showed the footage to Charlie, the tech guy, and he watched it twice without saying anything. Then he asked if I dropped the camera or reconfigured it. I said no. He asked again. I said no again. He told me to let him keep the SD card and offered me a few days off. I didn't argue. When I came back the following Tuesday, the camera was replaced with a newer model, and my old wrench case was missing from the truck. There was a brand new one waiting for me inside. Same brand, fully stocked, arranged alphabetically. I never asked who replaced it. I didn't want to hear the answer. I was driving on Highway 375 that evening, my dash cam recording the journey. Around 8 p.m. I stopped for a burger and checked into a motel. Later, curiosity led me to review the footage from earlier that day. The clip from 5:24 p.m. looked completely normal. Golden sky, flat desert landscape, power poles passing by. But when I reached the next segment at 5:29 p.m., something felt off. 14 seconds of pure black screen. Not static, not corrupted, just solid darkness. No audio, nothing. Then, just as suddenly, the video resumed. Same road, same angle, same speed, as if nothing had happened. I watched it repeatedly, trying to understand. The transition was seamless. No digital noise, no jumps. Every other recording on the memory card was pristine, with clear starts and stops. This blackout was unique. What troubled me most was how the camera behaved. The timestamp didn't skip, it ticked steadily through each second. The camera seemed convinced it was recording normally. A typical glitch would freeze or jump, but this was different. I considered potential explanations. Maybe a shadow? I checked the GPS satellite view. Highway 375 was completely open. No overpasses, no tunnels, no tall trees. Just endless sky and low scrubland. The scenery was eerily consistent. The same distant power pole, the same road curve, as if time had momentarily stopped. Something subtle had caught my eye in the surrounding footage too. Around 5:26 p.m., the sunlight briefly dimmed, almost imperceptibly. Shadows shifted slightly, though the road remained unchanged. After the blackout, at 5:30 p.m., another strange detail emerged. A low sound, like a distant subwoofer hum, barely audible. It lasted just 3 seconds before fading away. I hadn't heard it during the actual drive. I was hiking alone near Tikaboo Peak last fall in late October. Days were still warm, but nights cooled down fast. My goal was simple: get away, walk, sleep under the stars, find some quiet. I didn't go near the peak itself, too close to the restricted zone. Instead, I parked off Groom Road and hiked a wide loop along the southern foothills, careful to stay clear of the perimeter signs. On my second night, I'd set up camp in a wash, cooked some instant noodles, and climbed a nearby ridge to watch the sunset. The desert view was incredible, but something else caught my attention during that trip. I drove the entire stretch without stopping, checking my trip log and odometer. Everything seemed normal. Distance matched the map, but I kept thinking about the blackout. The next morning, still in Tonopah, I drove back up the highway using GPS coordinates from the dashcam footage. There was nothing at the blackout spot. No marks, no tire tracks, no poles or wires or buildings. Just open dirt, some scrub brush, and a distant fence. I left the dashcam running again, drove the same route and speed, and watched the footage that night. No blackout this time. Everything recorded cleanly. But while reviewing, I noticed something unexpected. At 5:29 again, there was a flash frame, a single, barely a second moment. Not black, but bright white. So intense it overexposed the entire screen, like a floodlight right in front of the lens. I slowed the video frame by frame, no discernible shape or source, just pure white across the screen. Then back to normal, happening only in this specific location. I stopped using the dash cam after that. The footage is backed up on a drive. Sometimes I think about sharing it online or showing someone, but I always decide against it. There's no explanation, just a clean 14-second blackout in the middle of nowhere, followed by a flash in the exact same place the next day. If I experienced anything else during that trip, I don't remember. I drove the whole way without stopping. The desert stretched out flat, endless under a deep orange light that made everything seem to flicker. I was perched on a rock, watching shadows drift across the valley floor, when something caught my eye far out on the flats, maybe 8 or 9 miles away. At first, I dismissed it as dust devils or heat mirages. The desert plays tricks on you like that. But after a moment, I realized it was a convoy. 6 or 7 trucks moving in a loose line, no lights on, but clearly visible in the low sunlight. They were big, rectangular vehicles with high backs, moving like military transports with canvas-covered beds. Not unusual for this area. Everyone knows what kind of strange government activity happens out here. I pulled out my binoculars and started watching. Something felt off. First, no dust. The desert floor is bone dry, and anything moving that fast should have been kicking up a massive trail. But the air behind them was completely still. Second, absolute silence. I could hear the wind and a distant plane, but nothing from the trucks, not even a low hum. Their movement was unnatural. They maintained perfect spacing, no corrections, no slight swerves, just gliding across uneven terrain like they were on invisible tracks. I checked my topographical map later. Just open desert, no road. They moved with an eerie precision that almost made me laugh. Near a dry lake bed, they executed this bizarre, synchronized turn, like a ripple moving backward through the line. It was so quick and choreographed that it didn't seem real, and then in an instant, they vanished. Not sped away or went over a hill, they simply disappeared. One blink, and they were gone. I scanned the valley through my binoculars, searching every inch. Nothing. No dust, no shapes, no shadows, just empty ground. I stayed on that ridge until the cold drove me back to camp, trying to convince myself it was some strange visual illusion. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was something else entirely. I was working the night shift for a private security company near Fort Wuka in southern Arizona. Back in 2019, my job was straightforward. Perimeter patrol and motion sensor checks for a logistics depot leased near the edge of the restricted zone. The military base sat about 2 miles to the northeast across a low desert ridge. Our unspoken agreement was simple. They stayed on their side, we stayed on ours. My nightly routine wasn't glamorous. An old Chevy Tahoe with failing AC and a crackling two-way radio were my only companions. My shift ran from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., mostly solo. The cameras around the outer fence were unreliable, half offline or pointed uselessly. After midnight, check-ins became casual. Todd, my supervisor, probably spent most of his time asleep in the trailer office. That mid-June night was scorching. Something felt off from the start. By morning, I'd be haunted by an unsettling experience that would keep me from returning to this desolate place. During my patrol, I noticed tire tracks that didn't make sense. Big tracks with dual treads typical of military vehicles, but these weren't following any trail. They cut unnaturally straight through scrub brush, over dips and rises. I traced them for about 20 yards before they simply stopped. No curve, no fade, just an abrupt end in untouched desert ground. No footprints, no drag marks, nothing disturbed. That evening, I kept waking up, each time seeing a ghostly line of trucks moving across sandy terrain. When I started heading back to my truck, an uneasy feeling crept over me. The air felt heavy, like invisible eyes were watching. Halfway back, I rested in the shade of a boulder, those strange tire tracks weighing on my mind. On my drive out, a white SUV with tinted windows caught my attention near the boundary signs. The driver, wearing dark sunglasses, stared directly at me. No wave, no nod, just a cold, unbroken gaze that followed me until I disappeared from view. I haven't returned since. As the day wound down, the heat still hung heavy in the air. I had my windows open and a cooler of ice water in the back seat. Around 1:40 a.m., I pulled into the southern checkpoint, just a small gravel turnout near the wash with a broken streetlight overhead. While filling out a log sheet and half listening to an earlier Diamondbacks game, I spotted a light. At first, it looked like a plane, a single bright point above the Argel line, motionless. No blinking, just a steady white glow. I watched it for a minute, wondering if it might be a drone, but its movement wasn't right. No bobbing or adjusting, just completely still. Then it began descending, smooth, silent, slow. The ridge blocked my view of the base beyond, but I knew these roads well. This object was lowering directly toward the comm station, that spot with satellite dishes and strange radar domes where the Army had once chased us away during patrol. I watched the lights sink lower until they vanished behind the ridge. I waited, expecting some sound. A helicopter, ground vehicles, anything. Silence. I keyed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. Over." Todd's voice crackled back, groggy. "Go ahead." 7. "I've got a bright object descending behind Sector C ridge. Silent. Looked like it went down just north of the dish array." A pause. "Then yeah, that happens sometimes. Just log it." I held the mic. "Say again?" "Don't worry about it. Write it in the notes. Don't go over there." Todd didn't sound surprised. More like he was repeating something rehearsed, something he'd been told before. I set the radio down and kept watching the ridge. No sound, no glow, no sign of anything. After about 5 minutes, my Tahoe's dash screen flickered, not turning off, but like static. The backup camera blinked on briefly, even though I was in park. The radio went silent. One smack brought the feedback, but the game was gone. Just dead air. That was enough. I drove slowly toward the North Road, skirting the base's edge. The gate was locked, of course. We weren't allowed past the inner fence, but there was a decent view of the ridge near the water tank. I parked there. I pulled up to the site, killed the engine. The desert was silent, heavy with heat. No movement, just stillness. Then the sensor alarms started lighting up. Not the cameras. They were useless. But the old metal motion detectors along the fence began pinging, first in zone 4, then 5, then 6. It felt like something was pacing the perimeter on the other side. I stepped out of the Tahoe with my flashlight and shined it down the line. Nothing. No wind, no animals. Yet the sensors kept going off in steady intervals, like methodical footsteps circling the area. I radioed Todd. "We've got multiple sensor hits along the north line. Something's moving out here." His response was slower this time. "Don't engage, stay in your vehicle." When I asked about the camera feed, he said no, just static across half the monitors. He repeated his instruction not to approach the fence. That irritated me. I wasn't new to this. I'd been out here a year and never experienced anything like this. So I grabbed the spotlight from the back seat and walked to the fence anyway. Still nothing. No sound, no tracks. But the sensors were going crazy. Then abruptly they stopped. Every zone went quiet, as if someone had flipped a switch. The spotlight flickered in my hand and died. I returned to the Tahoe, windows down, feeling something was off. The air felt heavy and wrong. I kept checking the mirrors, seeing nothing. Around 2:30, the radios unexpectedly crackled back to life, static first, then voices. I checked the dash. Everything seemed normal again. I did one final property loop before heading to the trailer. Todd was already packing up when I entered. He looked distracted, not tired. I described everything, the sensors, the equipment, what I'd experienced. He didn't write anything down, just nodded and said cryptically, They don't tell us everything. 6 months later, I left that job. Never saw that light again. This wasn't a joyride. I was driving east on 375, the extraterrestrial highway, around 9 at night. I was heading from Tanapa to Caliente to pick up a backup generator for the cell tower I maintained. The company didn't want to pay for delivery, so they offered overtime if I used the work truck and kept receipts. I wasn't excited, but I needed the money. I'd driven this route plenty of times before. The stretch near Rachel, where the highway curves gently between low hills, is usually quiet, usually nothing out there. Just sagebrush and gravel on both sides. On clear nights, you can catch the faint glow of Groom Lake lights behind the mountains, a soft haze without towers or blinking red beacons. This particular night, I was a few miles past the black mailbox turnoff, listening to a baseball game crackling in and out on AM stars dotted the sky. My headlights occasionally caught a rabbit, but I hadn't seen another vehicle in nearly half an hour. Then I came around a bend with a small pull-off and a faded cattle guard. That's when I saw it, a road that shouldn't exist. Fresh pavement, black and pristine, with chalk lines still visible along its edges. No gravel shoulder, no cracked edges. Just a perfectly smooth lane, maybe 2 car widths wide, leading northwest into the hills. No signs, no markers, not on any map or GPS I had. And I knew with certainty it hadn't been there a month earlier. Automatically, I slowed down and hit the brakes. Rolling past about 10 yards, I backed up. The lane curved around the first set of hills, disappearing into a shallow rise. It didn't look like a construction zone. No cones, no lights, not even tire marks. With my hazards on, I stared. Something felt off. There was no logical reason to build a road out here. I'd seen plenty of BLM access roads and service trails, and this wasn't one. This was real, smooth asphalt, dark and clean as if laid just days ago. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo through the windshield. Checking the GPS again revealed nothing, just a blank spot where the road should be. For a moment I considered following it. Curiosity, I suppose. But something held me back. Not quite fear, but a strange hesitation, like walking into a room and forgetting why. Instead, I decided to loop around and return. Maybe I was tired. Maybe some trick of light was making the road seem newer than reality. I checked my mirrors, turned around slowly, and headed back. About half a mile later, I circled back to the same spot. The road was gone. Not hidden, not overgrown, simply gone. Just flat ground where moments before a perfect stretch of pavement had been. I was driving along a remote desert highway, the pavement giving way to dirt and brush. Something felt off. I slowed down, high beams cutting through the darkness, and drove past a specific spot multiple times. The cattle guard caught my attention, rusty and half buried, exactly where I remembered it from a previous trip. But that didn't make sense. On my last drive, a new road had cut right across this section, completely covering where the guard should have been. Now it was back, as if that road had never existed. I parked and got out, flashlight in hand, searching for any signs of recent activity. The ground was dry and undisturbed, with no loose gravel or evidence of construction. Back in the truck, I checked the photo I'd taken. It was just a black image, not corrupted, but completely dark. My dashboard was barely visible, and beyond the windshield was nothing but a pitch-black void. No road, no reflections, just emptiness. It made me uneasy. I sat, with the engine running, flipping between maps and satellite views. Nothing showed any new roads. This section of highway hadn't been updated in years. Unsettled, I drove the rest of the way to Caliente without stopping. At the equipment depot, I casually asked Paul if he knew about any construction near Groom Lake. He just laughed and said they're never told anything. I kept the strange experience to myself, telling the supervisor the drive was routine. About a week later, I drove the same route again, same highway, same time of night. I slowed down early, carefully scanning both sides of the road. Nothing new. No fence cuts, no unexpected pavement, no mismatched patches. The road I'd seen before had vanished completely. This was during my astronomy phase in Green Springs. After moving there, I'd gotten deeply into stargazing, one of the few interesting things to do in such an isolated place. The skies were incredibly dark, perfect for observing. I'd set up my Dobsonian telescope, enjoying the endless stars that stretched across the night sky. My back deck faced south that night. It was a casual stargazing session, Nothing serious, just scanning for double stars and enjoying the moment. The air was eerily still, with not even the pine trees on the ridgeline showing any movement. I didn't realize the crickets had gone silent until later. With my red flashlight clipped to my hoodie, I was leaning over the telescope when something felt off. It wasn't in the eyepiece, but in the sky itself. Near DB, a section looked strange. At first I thought it might be a low cloud or high-altitude haze, but the week had been bone dry. The stars weren't dimming. They simply vanished, as if someone had erased a section of the sky. This wasn't a typical cloud shape. It was too precise. A long horizontal oval, blacker than black, without shimmer or glow. Just a solid cutout moving slowly from left to right across the sky. I blinked several times, checking my vision. The shape moved silently and steadily, blocking the densest part of the Milky Way like an unwelcome intruder. No lights, no trail, just pure darkness. Stepping away from the telescope, I stood at the deck's edge to view it with my naked eye. This thing reflected nothing, not starlight, not the ambient horizon light. It was like staring into a hole in space. After about 30 seconds, I realized I was holding my breath. Something felt fundamentally wrong. Not frightening, exactly, but a strange pressure in my chest made me want to freeze. Then it paused, mid-movement, completely still. The silence was overwhelming. No insects, no rustling, no distant dog barks from the houses below. Just a thick blanket of quiet and a weird humming in my ears, like the aftermath of standing up too quickly. For about 10 seconds it hovered. Then it shifted. Not forward or down like a conventional aircraft, but differently. The space around it seemed to change, not the object itself. Its movement was instant yet smooth, a repositioning that defied normal physics. It stayed low for roughly 5 seconds before resuming its glide, this time moving slowly toward me, still silent, still impossible. It was a Friday night in late August, bone dry and still warm even after the sun had been down a while. I was out near Walker Lake with my buddy Jordan, having driven up from Hawthorne after dinner to do some night fishing. Not at the lake itself, but at a small side pond in the old floodplain just south of it, technically part of a dry lake bed. Most years it's nothing but cracked mud and weeds, but with the snowmelt runoff that spring, it held enough water to stock a few brown trout. We arrived a little after 9 p.m., full moon, no wind, clear as glass. I remember backing up until I was standing inside the kitchen door frame, staring through the screen. Something was moving above the ridge, blotting out more stars as it passed. It was big, maybe football field size, but hard to tell with no lights or structure to reference, just a moving shadow. Maisie, my neighbor's dog, started barking 2 houses over. Then suddenly she went quiet mid-bark, not like she stopped, but as if something had cut her off. The power went out a few seconds later. I heard the fridge click off behind me and the porch light died, leaving me in complete darkness except for the stars. I stepped out slowly, eyes now adjusted, and realized the thing was right above me. No lights, no detail, just a void blotting out half the sky. It wasn't directly overhead, but off to the right, maybe 100 feet up, lower than any plane had business being. Still no sound, still no wind. I stood frozen for what felt like a full minute. Then it moved again. Same weird way, not flying, just changing position. It shifted back toward the ridge and rose higher, gaining altitude in a straight vertical line like it was done. I watched it until it disappeared into the stars, blending back into the sky as if it had never been there. A few seconds later, the porch light flicked back on. The fridge hummed. Crickets started chirping again, all at once. I stood there a few more minutes, then locked everything up and went to bed without brushing my teeth. The next morning, I checked the local weather logs to see if maybe a weird cloud formation could explain it. Nothing. Skies had been clear all night. I even pulled the footage from my trail camera, but it only caught static between 12:02 and 12:11 a.m. I didn't go out again for a week. When I finally did, I couldn't bring myself to look up. We were fishing near an old army depot, parked on a gravel patch by a shallow salt bush-lined pool. Not a picturesque spot, but the fish were biting, and that's what mattered. Jordan set up a folding table with snacks and beer while I readied the fishing rods. We planned to stay until midnight, maybe. The first hour was uneventful. We caught a few small fish and released them, making idle conversation. A strange smell drifted through the air, something like burnt dust or hot plastic. I didn't think much of it. Chemical odors weren't uncommon when the wind shifted in this area. Around 10:45, everything changed. Jordan lit a cigarette and drew my attention to the sky behind me. "Hey," he said, "what are those?" When I turned, I wasn't expecting what I saw. 5 perfectly round white lights hung motionless in a horizontal line across the western sky. No blinking, no movement, no sound. They looked like precise holes punched into the darkness. Initially, I thought they might be flares, but they weren't drifting. No smoke trails, no flicker. They hovered at an altitude too high for helicopters, but lower than satellites, just sitting on a quiet shelf of sky above the mountains. We watched, silent. My phone showed no service, typical for out here, and when I tried to take a picture, the screen remained black. Then, without warning, the leftmost light simply vanished. Not faded, just gone. About 3 seconds later, the next light winked out, then the third, then the fourth, each disappearing with the same precise pause between them. When the final light disappeared, the sky looked exactly as it had before. No trails, no afterglow. It was like nothing had ever been there. We sat in stunned silence, waiting for some logical explanation, but nothing came. Jordan finally broke the quiet. "That wasn't normal," he said. I could only agree. Wednesday, late April. Cool but dry. I'd just finished a string of night shifts and finally had a few days where I didn't owe anyone my time. The Kaibab Plateau's north rim side of the Grand Canyon was calling me. Quieter up there, with tall pines, big sky, and a feeling like you've stepped outside the rest of the world. I'd been exploring forest roads of Pei El morning, searching for an old fire break trail. Someone on a forum mentioned loops near a restricted area. Not the park boundary, but the Department of Defense kind, a fence cutting through part of the forest. No signs from main roads, but follow the back trails long enough and you'll hit it. I wasn't trying to get into anything illegal. I just enjoy walking the edges of places I'm not supposed to be. Makes me feel like I've seen something most people haven't. Around noon, I parked my car off a disused spur road. Old tire tracks were visible, but nothing fresh. It felt like nobody had been out there in months. Later, the weirdness began. Back in the car, I noticed the dashboard clock said 12:32 a.m. That made sense. We'd been out a while. But my cheap analog Timex showed 11:07, with the second hand ticking. I tapped it, thinking I might bump the dial, but the time remained wrong. Jordan checked his phone. The lock screen said 11:06 inside the car in town with service. We figured maybe the phone was slow to update, but something felt off. Next morning, my watch still showed the wrong time. Not just a few minutes off, but over an hour. I reset it, and it's kept good time since. 2 days later, Jordan texted me. He'd been sleeping weird. Not nightmares, just waking up feeling like he hadn't really slept. I'd been experiencing the same thing but hadn't mentioned it. We didn't go fishing again after that. Not for a while anyway, and not near Walker Lake. There's just something off about that place, especially at night. That whole stretch between Hawthorne and Fallen has a long flat sky and too much empty space. It feels like the kind of place where things can show up, things that aren't supposed to, and no one would ever know. I was hiking with my standard gear, compass, map, and old Casio digital eyewear. Nothing special, just reliable equipment to keep me from getting lost. The forest was eerily quiet from the start. No wind, no birds, no wildlife, just the rhythmic crunch of my boots on pine needles. After about 2 hours of following a dry wash uphill, I came across something unusual. An 8-foot chain-link fence topped with barbed wire stretched endlessly into the surrounding trees, with no gates or markings visible from my side. I paused near a boulder, took a drink of water, and checked my compass. Everything seemed normal. The compass pointed northeast, matching my map. I continued walking parallel to the fence, maintaining about 15 feet of distance. The terrain grew increasingly rocky, and as I checked the time, 4:19 p.m., I decided I'd explore for another half hour before heading back. That's when things got strange. My compass started behaving erratically. At first, I barely noticed, just feeling slightly off course. When I pulled it out, the needle was spinning slowly, uncertainly, locking in for a moment before rotating again. I tapped it, shook it, even moved uphill, but nothing changed. I initially thought it might be a metallic ground vein causing interference, but then my watch caught my attention. It still read 4:19 p.m. I pressed buttons, but nothing responded. The screen was clear, but time seemed frozen, like a photograph instead of a living moment. The silence became overwhelming. No insects, no birds, no wind. When I clapped, the echo returned too quickly, as if the forest's dimensions were somehow compressed or distorted. Something felt fundamentally wrong. I stood motionless, listening. The fence remained behind me, untouched. Yet I was certain something on the other side was aware of my presence. Not watching, just knowing. I was flying from Tonopah to St. George that afternoon in my 1978 Piper Archer, a routine VFR hop I'd made dozens of times before. Flat desert below, sparse traffic, smooth air if the wind wasn't kicking. Around 3:45 p.m. I took off. Skies mostly clear, just a hint of haze along the horizon. The forecast promised calm conditions across the route. The first hour flew by normally. I climbed to 9,500 feet, got settled, leaned the mixture. My usual setup was dialed in, autopilot engaged, ForeFlight on the yoke, engine instruments checked. Then things got strange. I turned around and started heading back the way I'd come. My compass kept spinning. My watch stuck at 419. About 5 minutes into the walk back, I passed a dead tree that seemed weirdly familiar. Something clicked. I'd already passed it twice before, once going up the hill, once near the fence. The tree's top bent east, unmistakable despite the peeled bark. Either I'd walked in a circle or something had shifted. I checked my map. My markings no longer lined up. The dry wash I'd been following should have been to my right, downhill. Now it was gone. Just trees and brush. I kept walking. Didn't care if I had to bushwhack for miles. I just wanted distance from that fence. After what felt like an eternity, I saw my car's hood glinting between the trees. I practically jogged the last stretch. The moment I stepped onto the gravel, I checked my watch. 4:37 p.m. Seconds ticking normally now. I pulled out the compass. The needle pointed steadily north. I sat in the car, engine off, windows down, listening. Forest sounds returned. Insects, a bird call. Wind picking up. It felt like slipping back into a world I hadn't realized I'd left. The drive to the main road took about 40 minutes. I didn't stop, not even to check my suddenly functional phone with 3 bars. That night, I left the watch on my nightstand. Next morning, it was working perfectly. Time accurate. I tried taking it apart, looking for glitches or damage. Everything looked normal. No corrosion, no water damage, nothing loose. I haven't worn the watch since. Haven't gone back to that part of the Kaibab either. I was flying northeast of Rachel, about 35 miles out, when something caught my eye. Ahead of me, suspended in midair, was a strange shimmer. Not a ground heat distortion, but something hovering dead center in my windshield, oval-shaped and long horizontally. At first, I thought it was a sun reflection. I shifted position, but the shimmer remained unchanged, holding its precise shape. Calmly, I keyed the mic. N6845W, observing a visual anomaly, stand by. This wasn't a panic call. I just wanted to report what I saw and potentially get a vector around it if needed. The shimmer began to pulse, not in brightness, but in presence. One moment it was faint, like looking through water. The next it was nearly invisible. No clouds surrounded it, just empty blue sky and this peculiar distortion. Suddenly I wasn't flying. The next thing I remember was static in my headset, my hand still near the push-to-talk button. The panel showed I was level and at the same altitude. I glanced at the clock, 4:28 p.m. My last check was at 4:19. I'm not claiming time dramatically jumped, but I had zero memory of those 9 minutes. No course corrections, no turbulence, no radio chatter, nothing. It was like a mental blank spot, a skipped reel. The GPS track was steady, a straight line with no zigzags or altitude changes. But here's the odd part. A 0.3 nanometers gap existed in the breadcrumb trail. No data for that stretch. It looked like I'd teleported, though my signal never dropped. I radioed Salt Lake Center to confirm my earlier transmission. The controller sounded confused, saying he'd heard part of my call around 4:20, then nothing. He'd tried raising me twice, but got silence. I simply told him I was back on course and fine. Neither of us pressed the issue. I landed in St. George around 5:30. After shutting down and securing the aircraft, I pulled out my phone to check the voice recordings. I was out with 3 friends in late September near Rachel, Nevada. Mason, Jared, and Liz. We were all in our late 20s. Mason suggested camping near the Area 51 restricted zone border, not to trespass or get arrested, but as a novelty trip. We wanted to watch the sky and maybe catch some unusual lights. We brought 2 tents, parked my Tacoma behind a low ridge to block the wind, and set up about half a mile from the no trespassing signs, still on public land. Weeks later, while reviewing my GoPro footage from a flight, something strange caught my eye. The camera was mounted over my shoulder, angled at the panel and windscreen, recording in 1-hour loops. Everything looked normal until just before I saw the shimmer. The video glitched. One frame showed a clear sky, and the next had a faint arched blur in the distance, like a smudge across the horizon. Then the video jumped. The clock skipped 9 minutes, just like that. No buffer full, no card error, just gone. The rest of the flight looked fine. I remember making a memo during the flight. Nothing was recorded after the moment I called in the anomaly. It just cut out. After landing, I walked across the ramp and sat at a concrete picnic table near the hangars. I sat there for about 20 minutes, trying to piece together what I knew. I wasn't hurt, didn't feel dizzy or sick, but my left wrist, the skin under my watch, had a faint red outline like a sunburn, just that one patch, nowhere else. I hadn't taken my watch off the whole flight. That night, I called a friend who works charter ops in Kingman. I told him part of the story, leaving out the weirder details. He asked if I'd been flying near any restricted zones. I checked the map again, I was clear. The closest edge of the R4808 complex was still 20 miles south. I didn't file a report or call the FAA. What would I even say? I still fly that route now and then. I stay further north, add a few extra minutes for peace of mind. Nothing else has happened since. But I can't explain those 9 minutes or why I said what I said into the mic. I don't remember choosing those words. I've never said visual anomaly in my life. The night was calm after our campfire died down and everyone had gone to bed except me. I preferred staying up, never sleeping well on the ground anyway. The wind whispered over rocks, occasionally rustling the nylon tent walls. Liz's night vision binoculars had been entertaining earlier. We'd spent sunset spotting aircraft, easily distinguishing commercial planes from military ones by their speed and altitude. Around 1000 p.m., we'd even seen something banking impossibly sharp in the distance. Now, in the absolute silence, a red light suddenly swept across the ground about 20 feet from where I sat. It wasn't from a helicopter, flashlight, or vehicle. No engine, no sound. Just a perfectly even, 4-foot-wide rectangular beam gliding sideways through the scrubby terrain. At first, I thought someone might be testing a drone, but we were miles from any other campers. I stood slowly, watching the beam slide further into the brush. No source was visible. No shadow, no origin point. I scanned the sky and hills, turning in a complete circle. The beam stopped abruptly. Not fading, just freezing in place for 2 seconds before vanishing completely. Not switching off, simply disappearing. The darkness felt deeper now. The fire was nearly extinguished and moonlight had retreated behind the ridge. I grabbed my flashlight, illuminating the spot where the beam had been. Nothing looked different, just sagebrush, dirt, and some earlier tire tracks. Sitting back down, I kept the flashlight on my lap, wide awake and waiting. I tried rationalizing what I'd seen, maybe a strange reflection, but knew deep down this explanation didn't fit. The day started like any other drone shoot near Calhoun, Colorado. Wide open plains, farmland, and a few cattle properties scattered around. I'd driven from Colorado Springs that morning with a clear sky and light wind. My mission was simple: capture some low-altitude shots of an abandoned grain silo I'd found on Google Earth a week earlier. Everything was legal, public access land, far from any restricted military zones. I'd been flying drones for about 4 years, mostly doing freelance work like real estate footage and construction surveys. Safety was always my priority. No crashes, no lost signals. I was meticulous about battery levels and always checked airspace maps before heading out. Later that night, something strange happened during our camping trip. Around 20 minutes after settling down, I heard an unusual series of clicks. They weren't mechanical or metallic, but more like rapid, rhythmic tongue clicks, 4 in a row, evenly spaced. Then silence. The sound came from the northwest slope, about 50 feet beyond our tents. I stood up, turned off my flashlight, and waited. Another set of 4 clicks followed, in the same pattern and location. Almost involuntarily, I said hello. No response came. No wind, no animals, no footsteps. Something felt off, like I was being lured. I took a few steps toward the sound, then stopped, sensing a trap. Slowly, I backed up and got into the truck, locking the doors. I spent the next hour listening intently. No more clicks, no more lights. Eventually, I fell asleep in the cab. When I woke around 7 a.m., the sun was already up. Mason was boiling water on the camp stove, seemingly unaware of anything unusual. Jared and Liz appeared the same. I asked if anyone had been up during the night. They all said no. As we packed up and left, I stopped the truck by the spot where a red beam had swept across the dirt earlier. Walking out, I discovered a faint rectangular impression in the dust. Not burned or wet, just slightly more compacted, as if someone had pressed a plank into the ground and then removed it. I kept this observation to myself. Passing the no drones sign near the cattle grid, Mason joked about how foolish it would be to fly anything out here without risking getting shot down. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about that beam, its movement, its sudden stop. It didn't behave like normal light at all. The morning started like any other drone flight. Around 8 a.m., I parked near a line of half-dead cottonwoods on a dirt road. The landscape stretched out endlessly, flat and open, where even distant vehicles kicked up noticeable dust clouds. Wildfire smoke hazed the low 70s sky. At 8:15, I launched the drone, sending it to about 120 feet over wheat stubble toward the silo. Everything seemed perfect. Clean video feed, strong GPS, no interference. I completed wide orbits around the structure, then dropped to about 30 feet for tracking shots along the dirt road. Suddenly, something inexplicable happened. The drone just stopped. Not a crash, but a complete mid-air suspension. Telemetry showed full signal bars, 63% battery, no wind warnings, no obstacle alerts. Yet it hung motionless, unresponsive to my controls. I tried adjusting pitch, turning, hitting return to home. Nothing worked. Then the altitude reading plummeted from 33 feet to 0 in a single second. Strangely, I never saw it fall. The video feed remained continuous until it froze on a single frame, then went black as if someone had covered the lens. A tight feeling gripped my chest. Not quite panic, but close. I shut down the controller and walked the field, scanning meticulously. The dry, flat ground should have made finding the drone easy, but after pacing a 10-yard grid for nearly half an hour, I found nothing. I checked the silo's perimeter, hoping it might have clipped something during descent. Just as I was ready to write it off as lost equipment, I spotted something 50 yards north, partially hidden under a rusted cattle trough. The drone sat there, completely intact. No screw, ches, no bent props, no gimbal lock, but it was dead. Completely powerless, despite having over 60% battery minutes earlier. The first time I noticed something was wrong was with the battery. It wouldn't flash, charge, or register in the charger back home. The backup battery was the same, fine when I left, but completely drained when I found it. That day, I simply packed up and drove home. Later that night, I connected the drone to my laptop to retrieve whatever was left on the SD card. The files stopped abruptly at 8:31 a.m., with the telemetry showing a drop at the exact same second. No footage captured the fall. The last video was a clear shot of the silo's southern wall, then black. When I checked the flight logs, they indicated a normal landing, not a crash or forced descent. But I never initiated a landing, and the drone wasn't near its last GPS point. Curious, I sent the log to DJI support. They claimed the file showed no errors or signal loss, suggesting a safe manual landing, which made no sense. I tried every control, but the drone didn't respond. The next weekend, I returned mostly to investigate potential signal interference. I set up in the same spot with the same drone and a new battery. The props wouldn't even spin. Before launching, I noticed a strange shimmer on the horizon, initially thinking it was heat haze. It looked like a wavering spot about 200 feet above ground, as if the air was bending. When I stepped forward for a better look, it vanished like a mirage. About a minute later, the drone app flashed a no-fly zone warning, a hard block similar to what you'd see near an airport. But there was nothing restricted in that exact location. I checked FAA maps before you fly, and even sectional charts. No restricted airspace showed up for 5 miles in any direction. After waiting 20 minutes, the block remained. I tried a different drone, smaller and less sensitive, but it wouldn't even arm its motors. Since then, I haven't flown out there. Occasionally, I'll pull up the old GPS coordinates, 38.8872, NES 104.2957, just to see if anything appears on satellite view. But there's nothing, just an old trough, cracked dirt, and weeds. No towers, no gear, no signs. I still have the drone. It won't power on. It was early November, around 2 a.m., and I was out checking the south pasture. The ranch sits about 12 miles east of Tonopah, a stretch of open range and sagebrush with old juniper clusters near the hills. My closest neighbor is 5 miles south. I've got motion lights along the back half of the property and a trail cam by the water trough, mostly to catch mountain lions. It's quiet country, flat for miles, with ridges to the north. Something felt off that night. Most folks don't patrol fence lines after dark, but I'd heard the cattle stirring from the house. When you've lived out here long enough, you develop an instinct for what's normal. This wasn't coyotes. The movement was different, heavier, more spread out. I took the quad out, same one I've had since 2008, brought the spotlight, a thermos, and my 30-30. Not because I expected trouble, just out of habit. Cold night, clear, no wind, no moon, stars sharp as broken glass. Around 220, I reached the south line and parked next to the cattle gate. Engine off. I listened. At first, nothing, just the engine's cooling clicks and distant cow movements. The spotlight swept the area. Everything looked fine. Then I saw it. Maybe 400 yards out, beyond the fence where the land drops toward the dry creek bed. Not a cow. Something else entirely. It wasn't walking, it was gliding. That's what haunts me. No bouncing, no swaying, just moving in a perfectly straight line, 4 or 5 feet above the desert floor. No wings, no legs, a dark shape, maybe 7 feet tall, longer than wide. Not like a tarp, too purposeful. I stood behind the fence, just watching. Didn't reach for the rifle, didn't call out, can't explain why. Suddenly the spotlight died. Not flickered, completely out. Fresh batteries, and nothing worked. So I used the rifle's scope for a better look. The shape kept moving. Same height, same speed. Heading west, parallel to the fence line. Not coming toward me, not avoiding me, just steady. I was out late one night in October, parked just off Groom Lake Road near midnight. I'd driven from Kingman for a weekend getaway, wanting to escape everything. The night was calm until something caught my attention in the field. Suddenly, the object stopped dead in midair, as if hitting an invisible barrier. I lowered my rifle, blinking to make sure I wasn't imagining things. It remained perfectly still, hovering above the brush. The air grew heavy, and my ears popped like I'd ascended too quickly in an elevator. The hairs on my arms stood up, even under my jacket. It felt like the moment before a thunderclap, but the sky was silent and starry. No obstructions, no wind, just an intense pressure. The quad's instrument lights began blinking erratically. The fuel gauge spun a full circle, and the odometer reset itself. For a brief half-second, the radio crackled with static before cutting off. The engine didn't start, but the starter clicked once, despite the keys being in my coat pocket. That thing in the field remained motionless. I slowly backed away from the gate, taking about 10 steps, careful not to turn my back on it. After what seemed like a minute, it started moving again. Same direction, same height, same speed, as if nothing had interrupted its path. The moment it resumed motion, the air snapped back to normal. My ears popped again, this time in reverse. I could hear cattle shuffling in the darkness. I watched until it disappeared behind a small rise near the creek bed, never to reappear. I waited another 10 minutes before returning to the quad. The instrument panel came back to life normally, though the spotlight remained unresponsive. Back at the house, I checked the trail cam footage. From frames 217 to 228, it was frozen on a single image of an empty water trough. Time continued ticking, but the image never changed. The next morning, I returned with the dogs. No tracks, no marks in the dust. The fence was untouched. I kept quiet about the incident for a while. Eventually, I mentioned it to my neighbor Kyle over beers. He simply nodded, revealing he'd seen something similar near the same creek bed about 6 years earlier. No further details were shared, and I didn't press for more. Now I still walk the fences at night and ride the same quad, but I avoid parking near that particular stretch. I just keep going. I'd done the Area 51 tourist route countless times before, always stopping for the obligatory photo by the warning sign. But this night was different. My plan was simple: park, sit, and watch the sky. I brought minimal gear: a folding chair, some snacks, a cheap monocular from a pawn shop, and a blanket. The location was remote. No cell signal meant I'd downloaded star maps in advance and switched my phone to airplane mode. The night was colder than expected, probably low 40s, but the sky was phenomenal. Crystal clear, no clouds, no moon, just an endless canvas of stars. My spot was about 200 yards off the main dirt road, on a flat pullout with zero surrounding lights. After killing the engine and leaving my keys in the cup holder, I stepped out. The mountains encircling the base looked surreal, like cardboard cutouts leaning against the starry backdrop. Especially the range to the north, which always seemed closer than it was, the Papoose Range. While scanning the sky near Cassiopeia with my monocular, something caught my eye. A subtle flash, not from above, but from the ground. It wasn't bright, more like a momentary lightning-like blink, but without sound. The source was the mountains, a quick strobe lasting maybe half a second. The color was strange, a dull amber orange, unlike anything natural. For an instant, the mountain ridge seemed to flicker like an old film reel. Something shifted. Behind or within the terrain, I glimpsed a massive shape, roughly the size of a small stadium, angular, almost architectural. Its perfection stood out, too smooth, too symmetrical to be part of the natural landscape. Then, just as quickly, the light vanished. The mountains returned to their original form. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. Was it fatigue? A visual illusion? I settled back into my chair, blanket wrapped tight, eyes fixed on that precise spot. Minutes passed. Silence. Stillness. Just as I started to relax, my car's dome light flickered on. Oddly, the driver's side door remained completely shut. We were hiking near Queen City Summit, close to the Nevada Test and Training Range. The warning signs were serious, bright yellow metal markers about deadly force and hidden sensors. We weren't trying to cause trouble. It was me, my cousin Tyler, a machinist from Sacramento who's into aerospace, Marco, a conspiracy enthusiast with an infrared scope and flat-brim hat, and we just wanted to camp, stargaze, and maybe see something unusual. I'm not really into that scene, but I enjoy hiking and had a long weekend, so I tagged along. We parked off a dirt road east of Rachel. Later, I found myself sitting 10 feet away from our vehicle, noticing something strange. No animals were around, no wind stirring. The interior light was glowing faintly through the windows as if someone had cracked the door, except it was still completely sealed. I walked over, opened the door fully, and looked inside. Everything was untouched. Keys remained in the cup holder, windows rolled up. I closed the door and the light switched off. Sitting behind the wheel with the engine off, I stared at the mountains through the windshield. Tiny flickers caught my eye every few minutes, faint pulses reminiscent of heat lightning without clouds. I turned on the radio. Static. Every single station, AM and FM, was just dead air. No background noise at all. This made me uneasy. There's usually something. I turned the radio off and cracked the window an inch. That's when I realized the absolute silence. No insects, no wind, just a dead, airless quiet. I sat watching the mountains for 30 minutes, expecting them to stutter again, but they never did. Yet the silence remained, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was hiding behind the ridge line, something not part of the desert. Eventually, I started the car. Everything came on normally. No dashboard lights, no system errors. I drove back down Groom Lake Road slowly, frequently checking the rearview mirror. Once I hit the highway, radio stations returned one by one. Static faded, music played, talk shows emerged. The desert behind me looked unchanged, vast and empty. I've been out there a few times since, never saw that flicker again, but I don't park near that stretch of mountains anymore. We were camping in the desert, about 6 miles in along a dry wash. Early March brought a chilly night without clouds or moonlight, just a thick canopy of stars overhead. We'd set up camp behind a rock formation that shielded us from the wind and built a small fire to cook sausages and beans. Around 11 p.m., the night felt typical until something changed. Marco was scanning the sky with his monocular, while Tyler tinkered with a homemade antenna designed to pick up air traffic control signals. I was relaxing on my pad, gazing at Orion. Then we heard it, a soft, high-pitched buzzing that seemed mechanical and suspended in the air around us. It wasn't loud, but steady and distinct. Tyler sat up and asked, "You hear that?" Marco nodded, silently, already pointing his monocular toward the ridge behind us. When I stood to look, the stars initially appeared unchanged. Suddenly, 3 of them moved. They formed a perfect triangle, equally spaced and low in the sky. The lights were white but subdued, dimmer than typical aircraft strobes, and completely motionless. The buzzing incrementally increased, reminiscent of an old fluorescent bulb turning on. I tried to use my phone camera, but it froze on the loading screen. No matter what I did, nothing worked. Tyler's phone was completely unresponsive. Marco's hand-crank flashlight became our only functioning device. The moment Marco switched on the flashlight and pointed it upward, everything changed. The buzzing stopped instantly. The light formation began drifting sideways with an unnervingly smooth, deliberate motion, as if gliding along an invisible track. No tilting, no wobbling, no trailing behind. We watched for perhaps 20 seconds before the lights simply vanished. Not fading, not zooming away, just abruptly gone. The buzzing didn't return. The stars looked completely normal again. We stood in stunned silence. Eventually, we returned to the fire. Marco retreated to his tent early. Tyler absently prodded the coals, repeatedly glancing upward. No one spoke much that night. I was an air traffic controller at a small FAA center near Newport back in 2009. At 29, I was 4 years into the job and had settled into the night shift routine. Things were usually quiet, mostly cargo flights and occasional medevac runs to Portland. The center was basic: 1 main radar room, a communications console, and a few workstations. That night, just past 2 a.m., it was me and Dan Holloway. He'd been doing this for almost 2 decades and wasn't much of a talker. We weren't friends, but I trusted him. He was the type who only spoke when something needed attention. The night was clear and calm. A UPS flight was heading south along the coast, and a corporate jet was out near Boise. I was sipping gas station coffee and working on a crossword when something caught my eye. A blip appeared in the top right corner of the radar, over open water. The return was tagged at 80,000 feet with no transponder. While not unheard of, military sometimes runs dark operations. This wasn't in any scheduled military corridors. Dan had noticed it too. He just raised his eyebrows, saying nothing. I followed standard procedure and tried hailing it on the guard frequency. No response. I zoomed in and flagged it for observation. The radar showed it holding steady for about 10 seconds before dropping. Not gradually, but from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second. I stared at the screen, waiting for a correction. Ghost returns happened, but this was different. Later, during a camping trip, something similar occurred. Marco and I experienced strange interference with our electronics. His phone screen went green, made a clicking noise, and wouldn't boot until we were halfway back to the car. My phone seemed fine initially, battery at 82%, apps working. We didn't report anything. Who would we tell? All we knew was we'd seen something, and for some reason, our gear hadn't worked normally during the incident. The night shift was quiet until something unusual caught our attention. A radar return appeared at 80,000 feet, holding steady. Dan leaned over and whispered, "Real quiet. You seeing that?" I nodded. Then it vanished. Not gradually or off the edge of the radar, but completely, like someone had flipped a switch. No trail, no climb back up, nothing. We sat in silence for a moment. I pulled up the raw radar playback, hoping it might explain the strange occurrence. It didn't. The raw data confirmed what we'd seen. The return materialized at 80,000 feet, remained for a few sweeps, then dropped straight to sea level in less than a second before disappearing entirely. I ran a system diagnostic. Everything checked out normal. No errors, no drop pings. Against protocol, I printed a hard copy of the logs. Something told me I might want proof later. Around 2 a.m., 2 men arrived. They weren't in uniform and didn't come in any vehicle we recognized. Using badge access, they entered through the side entrance. They didn't introduce themselves, just claimed to be contract IT support from Seattle. One went directly to the radar terminal, while the other asked Dan to show him the system logs. When I asked who called them, Dan simply said, "Not us." They remained until just after 5 a.m. By the time they left, the system had been completely rebooted. Hard drives were purged, and every radar sweep from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. had been overwritten. My printed logs had vanished. Dan and I exchanged a look. He cut me off before I could even speak. "Don't." We finished the shift normally, logging a quiet night with no incidents. A week later, I was called into the manager's office for what they said was a standard proficiency review. They asked if I remembered anything unusual from that night. I replied, "No, just a quiet night." They smiled and said, "Thought so." And that was it. Dan transferred to Phoenix months later. I left the FAA the following year. I've never encountered anything similar since. Nothing even close. But I think about it more than I probably should. I was camping near Factory, out on BLM land in Utah, truck parked far from the dirt road. I hiked out to my usual spot, a quarter-mile from the trailhead with all my gear. The landscape out here is something else. Mostly flat with these weird lunar-like hills and rock formations that make you feel like you're on another planet. Early October brought a clear, cool night with no wind. Around 6:30, I set up my small one-man tent in a basic fire pit made from a few rocks. After making a quick dehydrated meal, I watched the sky transform from orange to purple, then deep black. The stars that night were incredible, the brightest I'd seen all year, with no moon to dim their shine. I settled into my camp chair, sipping cheap whiskey from a metal flask and scanning the sky for shooting stars. My phone was off, no service out here anyway. The silence was profound, almost overwhelming. Your ears start playing tricks in that kind of quiet. More than once I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but it was always just the wind or the sound of my own blood rushing. After 11, I crawled into my tent. Sleep didn't come immediately. A strange buzzing sensation filled my head. Not a sound, exactly, but a pressure similar to climbing in an airplane. I chalked it up to exhaustion or mild dehydration and tried to relax. Then I heard it. A deep, low rumble that started in the distance. Military jets sometimes fly low out here, so I didn't think much of it at first. But this was different. The sound wasn't moving across the sky, it was hovering directly above me. My tent began to vibrate gently, just enough to make the poles flex. Curious, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. Immediate silence greeted me. No rumble, no jet, no wind, just absolute quiet. Looking up, I saw something impossible. A perfect circular section of sky was completely blacked out, not like clouds which move, but a still round void that seemed to absorb all light. The stars around its edges looked unnaturally bright, their contrast somehow amplified. I stood frozen, staring at this impossible phenomenon, lost in time. Seconds? Minutes? I couldn't tell. I was working out of a temporary botany field lab in central Utah. Just me and a generator about 100 miles from the nearest town. Nothing but sandstone and sagebrush for miles. The station sat in a narrow gulch just south of the San Rafael swell, backed up against a small bluff. That night, some effing strange happened. The edges of a black circle in the sky were pulsing, not like lights, but more like heat ripples at the very edge. A faint hum resonated inside my chest, creating an unsettling pressure. My skin felt tight, and I suddenly felt incredibly exposed, as if under intense scrutiny. I stepped back toward my tent, eyes locked on the phenomenon, holding my breath unconsciously. Then, silently, the black circle began to fade. It wasn't an instant disappearance. Instead, stars bled back into the sky one by one until everything looked normal again. The moment it vanished, the breeze returned, and I could hear my own breathing. Instead of returning to the tent, I sat by the fire pit, watching the sky. Nothing happened. No jets, no lights, no sounds. Around 2 a.m. I crawled inside and zipped up the tent. Sleep never came. At first light I broke camp quickly. No breakfast, no coffee. I packed everything in just 15 minutes and hiked back to the truck. Something immediately felt wrong. The driver's side door was unlocked, something I never do. It's pure muscle memory to always lock my vehicle, especially when leaving it overnight in such a remote location. Nothing appeared disturbed. The glove box remained closed, and the cooler in the truck bed was untouched. But a strange smell permeated the cab, like static, reminiscent of overheating electronics. I drove out fast, bouncing across the road, constantly checking the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to be following. The landscape behind me remained empty. I didn't stop until reaching Hanksville. At the gas station, I filled up, used the bathroom, and sat in the truck with the AC running. Checking my phone revealed no messages, just a brief, weird SIM error notification that quickly resolved itself. During the drive home, I kept thinking about that black circle, perfectly round, with razor-sharp edges, like a geometric hole punched into the sky. Since that night, I haven't camped alone again. My living quarters were small, designed for solo occupancy. A compact greenhouse was attached, and everything was minimal. That week, the weather felt unusually stagnant. No breeze stirred, no clouds drifted overhead. The air seemed trapped, as if the entire landscape was holding its breath. I was working on cataloging genetically variant buckwheat strains and monitoring soil chemistry. My 6 custom soil sensors, rigged with a homemade Arduino array, tracked temperature, moisture, and pH levels. They typically transmitted data to my laptop every 10 minutes via Wi-Fi. Tuesday morning revealed something odd. When I checked my charts, I noticed a 5-hour data gap from midnight to just before 5 a.m. The system had completely flatlined before resuming normal operation. Despite checking, I couldn't attribute this to power issues. The generator hadn't shut off, and my laptop remained online. Later that afternoon, I discovered a hanging LED grow light had shorted mysteriously. Its plastic casing looked half melted, as if someone had applied a blowtorch to its edge. The light wasn't hanging straight anymore, with wires pulled loose on one side. I replaced it, assuming it was a random electrical malfunction. Around 2 a.m. the next night, the sensor alarm jolted me awake. 3 short beeps signaled a pH drop below 4.0, an unprecedented acid spike for that soil. Pulling on my boots and grabbing a flashlight, I headed to the greenhouse. The air carried a distinct burned dust smell. Not quite smoke, but like scorched minerals. The kind of scent you'd expect near a lightning strike. Opening the greenhouse door, a wave of unexpected humidity hit me. I hadn't watered anything, and it hadn't rained in days. Yet the glass was completely fogged. Stepping inside, I froze. Every single plant had turned. They were completely different from when I'd last checked them. Me, meticulously examining roots and misting the gallium hybrids just hours before. Something was very wrong. The greenhouse felt different. The pots had rotated, not fallen or dragged, but gently swiveled to face inward. At the center, a meter-wide bare patch of soil caught my attention. I'd left this spot open for new specimens, and now it looked subtly changed. The soil wasn't dug up, just smoothly pressed down, as if something had rested there. No prints, no marks, just a shallow depression. Above it, the glass ceiling told a strange story. A faint black scorch mark spread outward in a ring, about a foot across. The glass wasn't cracked, but had spiderwebbed delicately at the mark's center. The metal framing around it seemed microscopically warped, with a strange heat-induced shimmer. I backed out and locked the door, unsettled. The next morning, I checked the time-lapse camera. Normally set to capture a still every 30 seconds, the footage was bizarre. Plants looked normal until 12:47 a.m., then everything went haywire. Static, black frames, white screens. The timestamp jumped forward 4 hours. Digging into the raw images, I found every file between 12:47 and 4:51 was corrupted, pure digital noise. A recovery program revealed 437 missing or partial images. Clicking through thumbnails showed mostly garbage, but a few intriguing details emerged. Brief flashes of violet and pale green, a blurry curve of something metallic in the corner. I deleted the corrupted files and switched off the camera. That day, the plants behaved oddly. Gallium leaves curled inward as if enclosing something. 2 wild barley pots bent their stems at sharp 90-degree angles toward the central spot, holding their position even when I tried rotating them back. Something had changed, and I couldn't explain what. I was staying at a research site, working in a greenhouse. During one strange night, everything felt off. Around 1:30 in the morning, the temperature plummeted from 77 degrees to 61 degrees in just minutes. The air grew thick with an unexplained tension. My wife Becca and I often retreat to our cabin in northern Minnesota, a small place we built with my dad years ago. It's tucked away in the woods, far from cell service. Last September, during one of our last visits before winter, something bizarre happened in the greenhouse. The LED lights flickered and died, leaving an absolute silence. No sounds of wind or insects, just complete stillness. When I finally turned my flashlight back on, the center soil patch looked darker, almost wet, though no rain had fallen. The plants were subtly shifted. By morning, the 6 soil sensors were completely destroyed. Their plastic casings were bubbled, wires melted into the ground. Strangely, my laptop and everything else remained untouched. I radioed in about a hardware issue and cut the trip short. Before leaving, I collected a small soil sample in a sealed jar. Now it sits on a shelf in my apartment. Over days, its color transformed from dark red to gray. A faint ring circles the jar's interior, as if something had pushed outward from the center. Occasionally, I catch a fleeting whiff of burned dust when I pass by. The bench near the greenhouse had been mysteriously repositioned overnight. The entire experience left me unsettled, with more questions than answers about what might have occurred during those silent, charged minutes. We arrived at the cabin a little after dark. While Becca unpacked groceries, I got the fire going. Our usual routine. Later that night, we sat on the porch, listening to the woods. Up here, silence is different from town. No traffic, no barking dogs, just wind rustling through trees and an occasional owl. Around 11, something changed. The sounds weren't animal-like anymore. Snapping noises like someone stepping on sticks, then stopping. Another snap, maybe 50 feet away. I stood up and de-swept the flashlight around, but saw nothing. Probably a deer or porcupine, I thought. But Becca was uneasy. She hates uncertainty in the wilderness. I walked the tree line with the light, finding nothing. Still, an unsettling feeling lingered, like we were being watched. The next morning, we discovered our trail camera in the dirt. We'd mounted it on a birch about 15 feet from the cabin a few weeks earlier to track wildlife. Strangely, the camera hadn't fallen. Its strap was unbuckled, as if someone had deliberately removed it. A bear, maybe? But there were no scratches, no mud, no tooth marks. The camera wasn't even dirty. We brought it inside and powered it up. The battery was fine and the storage card was full. Plugging it into my laptop revealed 86 video clips from that night. Initial footage was normal, trees swaying, a rabbit hopping by. Then at 11:13 p.m., everything changed. The screen went black, but not like natural darkness. Instead, it was corrupted, static bars and weird pixelation rendering the footage unreadable. This continued for nearly 2 hours, except for one clip, 30 seconds long, timestamped 12:42 a.m. It was filmed inside our cabin, showing our bed with familiar flannel sheets and the old headboard. Becca and I were asleep, breathing slowly. The camera angle was low, positioned on the floor. And there, barely visible at the top edge of the frame, something was standing. Just a sliver of a shape. Long, pale ears curled around the camera's top, not human ears. The joints bent impossibly, unnaturally. Too many of them. I scrubbed the timeline back and forth. No sound, no movement. Just that single, chilling moment. The laptop screen froze in a still frame, then the file ended. I didn't show Becca right away. Instead, I closed the laptop and made up an excuse about corrupted footage. She knew something was wrong. That afternoon, she found the file and watched it herself. I heard her in the bedroom, no screaming, just total silence. When I came in, she was already packing. Within an hour, we left without even locking up, driving back to Duth to stay at her sister's place. For days, we didn't discuss it. Then the dream started. I'd wake up with a low static buzzing in my head, unable to remember what I'd been dreaming. I felt like I hadn't slept at all. Once, I woke up standing in the hallway holding my pillow. Another time, I discovered mud on my feet with no explanation. Becca experienced even stranger symptoms. Nosebleeds would hit her every night between 2 and 3 a.m. She'd wake up dizzy, her arms numb. Once she swore she saw a bluish silent light coming through the ceiling, like a flashlight. When I suggested seeing a doctor, she refused, saying it wouldn't help. 2 weeks later, I went back to the cabin alone. I told myself I was checking for a break-in or prank. The front door was locked. Nothing inside seemed disturbed. No broken windows, no animal tracks. But the trail cam was back on the tree, exactly as it had been. Same strap, same height, as if it had never been moved. The SD card was gone. I searched everywhere, digging through grass, checking the cabin, even dismantling the firewood stack. Nothing. Leaving, I felt an intense pressure behind my eyes, worse than a sinus headache. It stayed with me until I crossed back onto the highway. We haven't returned since. The cabin remains, its power still running through solar charging. We don't talk about it anymore. Months later, the laptop stopped booting. A repair shop confirmed the hard drive had been wiped with no explanation. We still don't know what was in that video, what was in our room, or how the camera got there. Some mysteries remain unsolved. I used to hike at night a lot. The quiet trails, cooler air, and lack of bugs made it perfect, especially in fall. My favorite route was a loop trail in the Ida Mountains, not far from Talamana Scenic Drive in southeast Oklahoma. Nothing too challenging, just peaceful ridgelines and dense pine forest. My typical routine was starting around 8 or 9 p.m. and finishing by 1 or 2 in the morning. This particular night was in late October, cold but clear, with dry leaves crunching underfoot and a half-full moon casting soft shadows. Not bright enough to hike without a headlamp, but enough to create an atmospheric landscape. I had the entire trail to myself, which was normal for me. After parking at a small turnout around 8:40 p.m. and checking my gear, I headed in. Initially, everything was uneventful, just the usual forest sounds. Wind rustling through trees, distant owl calls. About halfway through the loop, around 11:15, I stopped at an overlook with a view down into the valley. I sat on a flat rock, ate a protein bar, and turned off my light to enjoy the silence. That's when things got strange. 3 faint bluish-white lights appeared through the treetops across the valley. They were barely visible, moving slowly in a perfect triangular formation. Unlike a plane, these lights didn't blink. They maintained a consistent distance from each other, gliding just above the ridge. The way it moved was unnatural. No banking, no tilting, just a smooth, rail-like motion. No engine noise, no contrails, no disturbance to the surrounding air or trees. Completely silent. I turned my headlamp back on, feeling exposed, like whatever was out there might be watching me. I hiked faster after that, trying not to look behind me. The weird sensation persisted, that tight feeling in your gut that tells you something's not right. I kept catching myself turning off my headlamp and listening. The forest felt unusually quiet. The space was too low for a person standing, and those fingers, they weren't human. They were something else entirely. The ridge was quiet, almost unnaturally so. No wind, no insects, no rustling, just heavy stillness. I was about 20 minutes from the trail's highest point, a flat area with younger pines and open sky. That's when the smell hit me. It wasn't sulfur or rotting meat, but more like scorched plastic. The sharp scent of a hot circuit board. Not strong, yet distinctly out of place. Normally woodland smells drift and change, but this remained steady. I swept my light across the trees. Nothing. No smoke, no fire, just that artificial odor hanging in the air. My pace slowed and I moved carefully. At first, silence. Then came a subtle sound, branches shifting to my left. Not breaking, but moving as if something large was gliding smoothly through the underbrush. It seemed to match my pace precisely. When I turned my light, I saw nothing. The movement stopped when I stopped. I waited. Nothing happened. When I continued walking, the soft swaying of branches resumed. Something was moving just beyond my sight. I didn't want to run or make noise, so I gradually increased my speed. Surprisingly, the sound didn't follow. As I reached the ridge, both the strange smell and movement vanished. Near a clearing, where the trail runs along the hillside, I paused. The moon was higher now, and that's when I saw it, the triangle. Suspended directly above the trees, maybe 100 yards out, it hung motionless. Faint lights marked each corner. No sound, no wind, completely still. I killed my headlamp and crouched in the brush, watching. This wasn't like a drone. No wobbling, no flickering, just absolute stillness. After half a minute, it began to move. Not toward or away from me, but sideways, sliding over the tree canopy as if it were part of the sky, perfectly level and smooth. Then I noticed the stars, or rather, their absence. Inside the triangle, the sky wasn't just dark, it was empty, a complete void. Faint stars visible everywhere else simply disappeared within its shape. It was like looking at a hole punched through the night. I remained crouched until it passed behind some trees and vanished. I never saw it again. I was up early that morning prepping the weather balloon launch out by the outskirts of Amarillo, Texas. Late April, just before dawn, and the air was cool, but already holding the promise of heat for later. I work as a meteorologist for a small private research outfit, mostly routine stuff, sending balloons up to gather upper atmosphere data for storm forecasting. Nothing glamorous, just charts and numbers, but I liked the work. I liked being out where the sky was wide and empty. That day, the launch went pretty much like any other. We set up the balloon and the payload, sensors, radios, a tiny camera pointing down at the Earth. The whole thing was automated, except for the launch and the tracking. I was standing next to the basket watching it rise, the balloon getting smaller and smaller, drifting east with the morning wind. I had the radio scanner on, listening to air traffic. After the incident, everything changed. I stopped hiking at night completely. Now I stick to open trails, places with cell signal, where people are nearby. During the day I'll go out, but that's it. I never smelled that burning plastic scent again. Never saw those lights. But sometimes, lying in bed, I think about how quiet that thing was, how close it was, how it moved, like it didn't care whether I saw it or not. Or maybe it did. When I got back to my car after the hike, I unlocked the door and sat for a moment to calm down. That's when something felt off. My phone showed 2:47 a.m., which didn't make sense. The loop usually took 4, maybe 5 hours with breaks. Even with extra caution and slowing down, I should have been back by 1:30 at the latest. I hadn't stopped long enough to lose that much time. I checked my tracking app. It showed the route, distance, and elevation, all normal. But there was a big stretch with no data. It hadn't logged anything between 2 GPS points, just a straight line across a part of the trail that should have had several curves. The gap matched the amount of time I was missing. I drove home in silence. No music, no podcasts. I didn't want to think. Just sat there gripping the wheel, watching the trees on the side of the road in case something showed up again. I waited a while, then turned my light back on and finished the loop as fast as I could without fully panicking. The weather balloon launch was routine until something caught my eye. As the balloon climbed steadily, I pulled out my binoculars and watched the horizon. Sunrise was approaching, casting everything in a pale gold light. A tiny bright dot high up in the sky drew my attention. It wasn't moving like a typical aircraft or bird. Instead, it remained perfectly still, as if observing. I initially assumed it was a weather satellite or research drone, but something felt different. The object emitted a sharp, constant silver light without any navigation signals. No blinking, no flashing, just a smooth metallic shine reflecting the sun. Using my binoculars, I tried to get a clearer view. It appeared small, maybe a few feet wide, hovering almost motionless against the pale blue sky. No sound, no contrails, no visible wings or rotors. I radioed the air traffic controller. Amarillo weather balloon launch here. We're seeing a small object around 20,000 feet slightly north of our position. Any reports? Static crackled before a calm male voice responded. No known traffic in your area at that altitude. Nothing on radar matching your description. The balloon continued climbing, now approaching 23,000 feet and entering commercial airspace. The mysterious object remained stationed about 5,000 feet higher. While monitoring the balloon's telemetry on my laptop, I noticed something unusual. The GPS altitude was fluctuating more than normal, with subtle dips and rises that seemed inconsistent with a stable ascent. Checking the balloon's downward-facing camera feed, I caught a slice of sky above the horizon. Initially, the metallic object wasn't visible, but as the balloon drifted, it slowly edged into frame, faint but unmistakable. A perfectly round, smooth, gleaming shape suspended in the morning light. The morning started calm, but the atmosphere quickly changed. A steady breeze picked up as the sun rose, and I pulled my jacket tighter. My balloon's data showed an unexpected slowdown in its ascent, with the rate dropping sharply before leveling off. Looking outside, I saw the object hanging motionless in the sky. A sudden wind gust rattled the ground equipment. I knew I should have contacted someone, the FAA, military, or air traffic control, but something held me back. The object wasn't doing anything threatening. It just remained suspended like a silent observer. Its metallic surface caught the sunlight, appearing almost liquid. For 20 minutes, I watched the screen and scanned with my binoculars. The balloon began its expected descent, and a small commercial jet crossed the horizon heading west, well below the mysterious object. The pilot reported nothing unusual on the frequency I monitored. Then, at an altitude below 15,000 feet, something extraordinary happened. The object vanished instantaneously. No flash, no noise, no trail. 1 second it was there, the next completely gone. I searched the sky for 5 minutes afterward, finding nothing. The balloon's parachute deployed as planned, drifting gently to the ground about 50 meters east of Amarillo. Later that afternoon, I retrieved it and returned to the office to review the flight data. The altitude fluctuations during the ascent troubled me. Something seemed to have affected the balloon's buoyancy, yet the sensors showed no signs of interference. No electromagnetic spikes, nothing unusual beyond the strange altitude changes. I sent my supervisor the camera footage, cropping it to show only the sky where the object appeared. The file looked grainy and distorted, as if the camera sensor struggled to focus. Light seemed to bend oddly around the object. By the next day, the footage had disappeared. My supervisor claimed it was lost during transfer, citing a server error or hard drive crash. When I requested backups, none could be found. The following week, I checked with the FAA, hoping to learn about any unusual reports or radar logs from that time. The knock came just past midnight, soft but urgent on my front door. I'd been out late, tired, and wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, 2 men stood there, black suits, dark glasses even in the night, with those expressionless faces you see in movies. No introductions, just a statement that they needed to check my yard. Half dreaming, I rubbed my eyes. My yard? For what? Routine inspection, one said calmly but firmly, citing safety concerns. Something felt off. They looked like government types, but no badges, no IDs. Their manner suggested arguing wouldn't be wise. I stepped outside, locking the door. The night was cold, heavy fog rolling in from the nearby river, streetlights dim and flickering. The neighborhood was silent, no cars, just distant dogs barking. They moved quickly. One headed toward the backyard, scanning everything. The other watched me by the door. I tried peeking over the fence, but saw only my garden, old shed, and a few bushes. Minutes later, the yard searcher called me over. "Please stay inside," he said. I blinked. "Why?" "Standard procedure," came the polite but firm reply. Back inside, a weird knot formed in my stomach. Near the window, I watched through thickening fog that blurred everything like a haze. They pulled out heavy black bags, the kind forensic teams use. One carefully approached something smemlud, all near the shed, and began wrapping it up. No words exchanged. This all followed my earlier memory of the weather balloon launch. Officials had reported everything normal. No unknown objects, just scheduled commercial traffic. I hadn't heard anything more since then. No one else saw what I'd seen that day. A smooth, hovering silver dot in the sky, watching silently. Sometimes when I look at the clouds, I wonder if it's still out there somewhere, waiting, completely still and out of sight. I was out on the ridge just after midnight, astrophotography gear in tow. For years, I've used these long exposure shots of the Milky Way as an escape, a way to focus on something larger than myself. This late October night was perfect. Clear, dry, and cold, with stars that seemed to pierce the darkness. About 20 minutes from my northern Vermont home, I found a secluded spot. A small dirt path led to a clearing on the ridge, far from any streetlights. My Canon AE-1, loaded with expired Kodak Ektachrome from a thrift store, waited patiently on the tripod. I love film photography for how it demands patience and deliberation. My settings were precise, 30-second exposures, ISO 600, aimed at capturing star trails around Polaris. The ridge faced east, offering an ideal vantage point. After an hour of shooting, I packed up and headed home. The next morning, I began developing the film in the campus photography department's dark room. It's a cramped basement space with concrete walls and flickering fluorescent lights, typical of these places. Everything seemed routine. Then, without warning, they arrived. 2 men, dressed entirely in black, moving quickly and methodically. When I reached for my phone, the screen went black. No signal. Minutes crawled by, each feeling like an eternity. Suddenly, as silently as they'd appeared, the men walked toward the front door. One nodded at me, a gesture that felt more like a warning. Then they were gone. Their car had materialized and vanished without a trace. I stepped outside into the cold air, breath visible. The yard looked normal, save for a faint scuff mark near the shed. No footprints, no evidence of what they might have taken. That night I didn't sleep. Fog thickened outside and lingered until dawn. The next day, I thoroughly checked the yard. Nothing was missing, yet that scuff mark remained. I can't explain what they were seeking or why, but something was out there, watching, waiting. Those two men, I've never seen them again. The dark room was my sanctuary, quiet and oddly comforting. Surrounded by chemicals and trays, I pulled out the first few strips and hung them to dry. The star trails looked great, but something caught my eye on one roll. Sharp geometric streaks cut across the sky above the ridge. Not random, but deliberate, like patterns drawn in light. These weren't from airplanes or satellites. I'd never seen anything like them before. Under the light, I blinked and checked the negatives, wondering if it was a scratch or processing error. In the enlarger, the shapes became even more bizarre. Triangles, diamonds, and what seemed like a hexagon glowed faintly white. They remained sharp and rigid, while the surrounding stars blurred from the exposure. I showed the prints to Claire, my photographer friend. She suggested light graffiti or a film glitch, and I agreed, but something about it nagged at me. I returned to the ridge the next night, but clouds obscured the sky. Days later, I went to the dark room to make more prints. Mr. Carver, the janitor, gave me a strange look that seemed to hold something back. When I reached into my locker, I discovered the prints with the geometric streaks were gone. Not just a few, but the entire set. I asked Mr. Carver about the missing prints. He hesitated before explaining that men in black suits had come by after hours. They'd asked peculiar questions about lights, long exposures, and capturing things not meant to be seen. Their main concern was whether anyone had been photographing the sky, mentioning something about too much light and things better left unseen. The encounter left me unsettled. Something wasn't right, and those mysterious shapes continued to haunt my thoughts. The uneasy feeling never left me. After that night at the lab, I stopped going to the ridge and kept my discoveries to myself, not even telling Claire. My negatives remained untouched, but strange occurrences began to pile up. One night, walking home from the campus library, a black sedan caught my eye. Parked under a street lamp a block from my apartment, two men in dark suits sat inside, unmoving. Their headlights flickered briefly as I passed, and I could swear one of them was watching me. Hurrying home, I locked every door and window. The next week was unsettling. My phone battery drained rapidly, and I'd catch fleeting movements outside my window that vanished when I looked. While driving late one night, my headlights dimmed momentarily before returning to normal. Then came the cryptic email from an unknown address. "You've seen too much light lately." I replied, but received no response. That night, a shadow seemed to stand outside my apartment, disappearing when I looked closer. I tried to rationalize it as a trick of the streetlight. Eventually, I moved my negatives and prints to a safer location. The men in black never reappeared, but I always felt watched, as if something or someone was waiting. I never understood those mysterious shapes on my film or the reason behind those men's presence. Photography of the night sky became a thing of the past. It was a foggy, quiet night when everything changed. Near the end of the block, a black car by the curb caught my attention. Two men sat in the front seats, wearing black suits and old-fashioned top hats. What stopped me in my tracks were their faces, or rather the lack of them. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin as if erased entirely. I froze momentarily, then quickened my pace. Curiosity pulled at me, and I glanced back. In that instant, the car and its impossible occupants seemed to blur between reality and something else entirely. The street was silent and thick with fog. I found myself staring at the empty road, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A car had been there moments ago. Now it was completely gone. No trace remained. No lights, no engine sound, no tire marks, nothing. The scene was so strange that I couldn't quite believe what I'd witnessed. Who were those mysterious men? What was their purpose? I've never encountered anything like this before or since that night. The memory haunts me, a puzzle with no clear solution. The unexplained event sits in my mind, unresolved, leaving me with more questions than answers. The fog seemed to swallow every detail, making the entire experience feel like a half-remembered dream. I apologize, but it seems like the original text you intended to share is incomplete or was not fully pasted. Could you provide the full text you would like me to rewrite?